right, adding on my camera overlay. Here we go. Very distracted. We were watching the Bills game in the chat, and everybody. And now I'm all out of my ice and fire mindset. Oh God, for I this is we're on American time mostly, so most people understand American football. But to anybody that's not uh, from the U.S., American football is a little is really perplexing because it's a really beautiful sport. I'm completely morally against it because every player ends up getting brain damage, but it is undeniably um, a really really exciting game to watch, objectively better than every other sport. I just wish they could come up with a way that didn't give everyone brain damage. But yes, there's an exciting game between Kansas City and Buffalo that's just ridiculous. We were laughing about prevent defense and all the things that are like ridiculous that happen. It seems like in every football game. Um, I don't know if you watch football. There's something called prevent defense, where you take men from your line and you create extra safeties in order to make sure that no one does sort of these Hail Mary passes. But it just seems like it's so ineffective because they just do mid range passes and just march down the field and score anyway. So people joke that like prevent defense prevents nothing, and that's essentially what happened at the end of this game, and it's still going. It went to overtime. Oh, but yeah, I mean, who am I a fan of? I like the Ravens, unfortunately. You know, I that's they're my team. I'm from Baltimore, so um, what's funny is when I was young, I before the Packers were good, before Favre, I used to be a Packers fan, and got made fun of all the time because if you're a Packers fan back then, you were a fudge packer, and then when the Packers got good, everybody jumped on the bandwagon, and then I felt like it wasn't my win anymore. It wasn't my team anymore because now everybody's a Packers fan because Packers have been consistently good for 30 years now. Like they make the playoffs every single year. But the Ravens are still just, um, the Ravens are still just for Baltimore. No one roots for the Ravens except Baltimore, which is what's great about them. They're the team. Baltimore doesn't have much, but they've got the Ravens, and that's the only thing. So this is what's interesting about Baltimore people is so in the Baltimore had a team up until about 83 where the Baltimore Colts left in the middle of the night, and it caused this big trauma for the city. Like they still talk about it, like, oh, the fucking Colts, like leaving in the middle of the night. And so they didn't have a team for a good 15 years. And so during that 15 years, a lot of Baltimore fans would choose a second team to root for. So a lot of people from Baltimore have a secondary football team. It's usually the Redskins. It's usually the Washington Redskins, but a lot of times it's not. So it sounds like the family might have chosen the Eagles because it was close. But um, I've for Vikings, I've only watched one episode of Vikings, which was okay. It was all right. The Carmine was constantly like trying to get me to watch Vikings. He loved Vikings, but I saw one episode on a plane, and it was okay. It seemed like you know uh, um, it seemed like there were a lot of like physical female Vikings doing fighting, or at least in the episode I saw. But you know but with regards to Taipei, yes, it's been raining for like a month here in Taipei, and um, it's I don't know, it's okay, though everybody else. I mean, you can get around a lot of places in Taipei walking under awnings and stuff, and so you don't have to worry about the rain too much. All right, so a lot of hellos from all over. And the I think somebody in the chat had um, hold on really quick. Do you think Taiwan will have open borders? Um, so right now Taiwan has really restrictive um, uh, borders. There's no tourists right now. If you come in, you got to do a 2 week quarantine. If you guys were with me for my quarantine live streams, I talked about this quite a bit. And the there's a question of whether or not they're gonna kind of loosen things up, and I don't think so. Um, so right now, actually, some people have been getting through, and like just a couple days ago, someone went to a Costco who was COVID positive, and everybody's kind of freaking out. Like, you know, are people breaking through? They have a high vaccination rate, but because of Omicron, like things are still kind of uncertain. And I think everybody's saying no, not until elections are over. So at least until the end of 2022, no one wants to uh, you know be be the person that says, "Oh, let's drop it," and then everybody gets COVID and a bunch of people die. It's so no one's. It's very hard to have somebody loosen regulations because on something like this because they're going to get the blame for it. Um, Ray murdered a guy. Yeah, I mean, it's American football. Like, what do you think? But no, probably I thought he was taking the rap for somebody else. Wasn't he taking a rap for a friend of his or something? I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, what do you think? Like, football players are good people? Like, what am I supposed to look up to football players? Like, this is football is a it's a brutal game. It's a brutal game. It's a brutal game to watch. Every single so there's a study done on. I mean, these were donated brains, so it's perhaps not a proper representative sample, but um, they got 111 brains from former NFL players, and 99% of them, 110 out of 111, had brain damage. So like you go into the NFL, you're getting brain damage. So you're watching football is not, as somebody was saying, it's not necessarily any different from prize fighting or whatever. It's a savage sport. It's very beautiful. There's a lot of strategy. It's very entertaining. There's a lot to it, but it's a brutal game, and it's a brutal game that has brutal players. There's nobody in American football you should be looking up to as a good, maybe Colin Kirkpatrick or something. I don't know, but he's not even playing anymore. That's the thing is, if they really wanted him to shut up, they should have just given him more playing time, and then he would be brain dead, and then it would not be a problem anymore. But Ray was yeah, maybe he killed somebody. Maybe he was taking the rap for a friend of his. I don't know. It's not. It's a brutal game. Brutal people in the game. Brutal people running the game. I mean, on just all the way up. The people that convince you to take publicly funded tax money to build stadiums, and then for private profit, like there's nothing moral about American football. It's just a really beautiful game to watch. This is like the equivalent for the Europeans. Like, no one sits there and goes, "Oh, FIFA, what a great organization." Everyone knows FIFA is the most corrupt thing on the planet. But, it's European football. Like, football is really fun to watch. So what are you going to do? Football players are like Pokemon. I would say much worse. I mean, are much worse. Like, there's no guarantee that Pikachu or your Bulbasaur is actually getting hurt. Like, this is like proven brain damage to these people. Like, it's quite disgusting. But no, they're worse than Pokemon. Pokemon would be an ideal situation. That's. I mean, nobody's getting hurt in Pokemon. Um, what's your opinion of trans women competing in sports? I'm curious. Uh, so this is what's very funny. So no one cares about women's sports. No one cares about women's sports. No one ever cares about women's sports. So why all of a sudden is women's sports being used as an excuse to bash trans people? I mean, this is the whole thing. Oh, we can't give trans people's rights because women's sports. Since when do people care about women's sports? When did this happen? No one cares about women's sports. Why is this the excuse to bash trans people? I would say, like, were all of you watching WNBA or women's swimming? Like, when's the last time any of you out there watched like anything like that? That's it's such a fake issue. That's how I feel about it. Is that women's sports is a fake issue because when they because it's not like there's trans men competing in men's sports. Like, that's not the issue. Men's sports isn't touched, so it's all about women's sports. um so but no one cares about women's sports. It's just a reason why they just want to. I mean, sure, the women who compete care, okay. I mean, then we're weighing what's more important, like entertainment, for people that care about women's sports, or the women who are competing. I mean, or people that like want to live their life and are very persecuted and are stuck in this situation where they believe they're a different gender or sex inside from what they show on the outside. So I mean, which people do I think have the bigger? If I'm sitting here in a utilitarian sense, like, who am I making happier and who am I improving the life of the most? I would say, probably the trans people. So I think they win over women's sports. Um, I can name the Washington Mystics and wait, wasn't the Charlotte Hornets? Didn't they have it was like the Charlotte Buzz? Are they still around? I don't only remember because it was like Charlotte Hornets. Let me see if the Charlotte Buzz, if I'm successful. Char- no, no. I think they're no longer a team. Or I got it wrong or something. No, I don't think they exist anymore. See, like, I fail. I can't even name, and I've been to a Washington's Mystics game, which by the way, I think, by the way, going to a Washington Mystics game was actually really, really fun because it reminded me of of going to a basketball game when I was a kid. So if you're an old man like me, you remember going to like regular NBA games when you were a kid, and the basketball games were actually pretty straightforward. There wasn't that much entertainment. There's a halftime show. But now if you go to an NBA game, there's like drones flying around with advertisements, and people are constantly shooting t-shirts into the audience, and there's people come out to dance during every timeout, and there's laser lights and everything, and it's a three-ring circus. But a WNBA game was just straight up game again. Like, the halftime show was like the local high school marching band, and which reminded I mean it made me think of going to basketball games like when I was young, and so I kind of liked it. You actually saw families who could afford, because the tickets are cheap, and so you could take the whole family, unlike today where only rich people can buy these expensive tickets. So I do have a fond memory of it, but at the same time, like, I can't name two NBA teams. I just know the Washington Mystics. I'll give face vomiting a shout out for face vomiting. Um, Utilitarianism sucks, though. I mean, I think most people function on kind of a utilitarian moral structure. I mean, aren't we kind of interested in what helps the most people over the long run? I mean, what are our alternatives? Like, not thinking about people's well-being and what helps most people in the long run. I mean, some sort of like deontology thing where I'm gonna believe something is moral for the sake of moral, or just some sort of dogmatic belief um, with regards to religion or something. So it's not, you know even if you can find some weaknesses in utilitarianism, and of course every moral system is going to have some weaknesses, utilitarianism is probably our best one and how most of us work and function. I mean, I can't think of anything better than utilitarianism. Um, Thinking about what's the best thing for the most people. Now, usually people say, "Oh, um, somebody mentioned here in the chat the trolley problem," or, "Oh, what if like murdering 100 people, innocent people, like made a billion people happy?" And you're like, well, I mean, the problem is you start thinking about precedent, and you're talking about long term. So it starts becoming really difficult to quantify like what's really in everybody's best interest when you start like comparing these sorts of things. But it's also I studied economics. Economics is completely utilitarian, so it's I think it's kind of the way to go for it. But I can't think of anything better. Most of us live life on kind of a hodgepodge um, of morality, but I think utilitarianism is probably the bulk of how we go day to day. I understand that all of us have our little superstitions and things like that. Like, I was in China, I never ate dog, but I don't see any moral reason why I shouldn't have eaten dog. But what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Yeah. So this is, from a trans person out there, I appreciate the approach on the subject. It's I'm I can recognize when something's like a fake argument. Like trans athletes is a fake argument for something more insidious. Like it's the equivalent of like bringing up critical race theory. Like it's a distraction from the real issue. Like, do we want to make trans people's lives better, and how are we going to do that? And the answer should be yes. And for someone finding this completely obscure thing, like, what about women's sports? Oh, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. Oh no, women's sports. Like, come on. Let's think about what's really important here. Okay. Um, I want to talk about some ice and fire. So somebody brought up the I keep getting good chats that I want to talk about too. Yes, I've watched Peacemaker. Peacemaker is really funny. Peacemaker is really funny. Um, James Gunn is just really good at what he does, and um, the it's so the whole thing about like James Gunn like getting fired from um, Guardians of the Galaxy because of those stupid right wing online trolls like convincing Disney to fire him, and then him producing the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker and stuff, and as a result he keeps referencing it in the show, like the obstacles or opportunities thing. And so in a way it's like we had some a pretty good result. I mean, I'd like to see a third um, Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but Suicide Squad and Peacemaker are really funny shows, really funny, and I'm really enjoying them. Um, the and also like the actor that plays Vigilante, who I think did he play Dickon in Game of Thrones. Um, no, wait, no. He did not play Dickon in Game of Thrones. Um, but he played somebody in Game of Thrones, and I'm trying to remember who. But the guy that plays Vigilante, he's known from being on Bridgerton, but he's really really quite good in the show as well. I'm really enjoying it. I think it's a hilarious show, even if it all doesn't really make sense. Like no one, um, no one in the age range of John Cena would be listening to glam metal. He's a little young. It's really James Gunn's age would be listening to glam metal, but it might have something to do with his older brother in the show. Anyway, if you could have chosen the Democratic primary winner of 2020, who would it have been? I was supporting Elizabeth Warren. I thought she was the best candidate whose views aligned with mine. Though, if we're really talking about the most important thing being beating Trump, like I guess Biden was the best choice, and so Monday morning quarterbacking, Biden was the best one because he did win, so it was successful in that respect, and that's the thing is winning with a Democrat is usually more important than which Democrat, because how people vote is along party lines, and so which person isn't so important as which party, in my opinion. Just if you look how the votes go and how the agenda is pushed and things like that. So, I mean, Biden worked out. We got more than we expected. We got both houses of Congress, and Biden winning. It was a success. Hopefully we can keep going in 2022. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough right now, but the hope is, to hold on to the houses of Congress, which is, looking like a long shot, but that's what we really want. But people say, oh well, people sometimes have delusional ideas about which person's electable. Like they're in their bubble, and they kind of say, oh no, the only person that can unite everybody is Bernie, or the only person that can unite everybody is Booker or somebody. And like you have no idea. You have no idea what the other side would pull out. Like if Bernie were chosen, they would have been like, oh, he's a crazy socialist and he's old and he's insane, and there would have been anti-Jewish talk and all sorts of things that the right would have pulled out. And so in the end, like Biden did it. Like Biden won. He was the least targetable, I guess. I don't know. So, but I was originally supporting Elizabeth Warren. I liked her the most. Did Dirk survive? I don't. So this is a question about Dying of the Light. So in Dying of the Light, did he marry Brett and Brave? So Dying of the Light is this story by George R. R. Martin that it's pretty good. You should all read it. It definitely has some weaknesses, but the essential story is Dirk is the main character, and he has an ex named Jenny. And so her real name is actually Gwen, but he calls her Jenny. And so when you hear like Jenny of Oldstones in Game of Thrones and things like that, Jenny of Oldstones is probably a reference to Jenny from Dying of the Light, this idealized woman in his mind. And so there is a difference, because like Gwen is the real woman and Jenny is the woman on the pedestal that he idealizes. Anyway, so back when they were in love and doing all that, they made a promise. They had these like psychic stones, and that if the stone activated, that no matter where they were, they would come to each other. And so he's broken up with this girl for like 8 years, 10 years or something, but his stone activates. And so he has to travel all the way to the outer rim of the galaxy, to where there was this old festival planet. The festival's long gone. And everybody's left. So it's really kind of depressing place because the planet's dying. And there's all these hunters on the planet, like trying to continue on their toxic masculinity, like hunting culture. And so he offends one of them named Breton Braith, who has half his face burned, just like the Hound. You know, George R. R. Martin reuses a lot of his ideas, and so he accidentally kills Breton Braith's like husband, kind of husband, more complications. And so at the end of this, he's running from these Braiths who are trying to hunt him down the whole story. So it's like a and so he gets to the end and he finally agrees to duel Breton Braith. And at the end of the story, like, you know, they cut off before the end of the duel. But yeah, I when I first read it, I was like, oh, it's totally ambiguous. We're not sure if he dies or not. Now that I've read more of George's stuff, I think he's definitely dead. Like, and now that I really kind of understand the story more, I'm like, no, he's definitely dead. But because there's no, like, Breton Braith was just, he had every reason to kill the guy. And even though Dirk has a big moral journey and has all of these decisions about what moral code he's going to use and blah, blah, blah throughout the story, Breton Braith doesn't have this discussion. Like, his husband was killed and he's going to murder this guy. So they probably would make an okay couple, Dirk and Breton. Like, Breton Braith is like, in the end, he decides that Breton Braith is actually like a really admirable guy. And that his moral code like switches. But yeah, he should, but he's probably dead. None of this is communicated to Breton. So had Dirk explained all this, like everything that went through his mind through the entire story and the entire situation, maybe Breton Braith would understand, but it's not. It begins with the beginning of the battle. And so, he's pretty much dead. He's dead. Thoughts on the new bolt-on theory that Roose is a long-lived skin changer that takes over his heir's body whenever he dies and has for generations. That's an interesting idea. So we have this idea of second lives, right? Which is brought up with Varamir Sixskins, that after you die, you can have a second life. In somebody else, in something else, usually an animal. So Varamir Sixskins is the second most powerful skin changer that we've met in the story after Bran, and he is incapable of taking over another human being's body. Bran is capable, but he's not. So Roose Bolton would have to be as powerful as Bran. But then after taking over the body, he would have to not have his mind fade, because he talks about like losing himself in the animal over time and like eventually just having kind of a feeling or an element of somebody. And then the person he takes over would also have to also be an incredibly powerful skin changer to allow a third life or a fourth life. Because I think the idea is your second life is it, because the body you're taking over doesn't have the ability to then continue on doing more skin changing. So I think it would be tough. Like, it's true that if he had the ability and his offspring all had the ability, he might be able to pull it off, but he'd have to really marry the right woman, have her pass on his genes to the right person, then take over their body again, not have his personality fade, and then take over another person, and on and on and on. Yeah, I mean, the more I think about it, the more I kind of think that Roose Bolton's character, like a lot of the vampire stuff from Roose Bolton's character, people latch onto. And I kind of just think that the reason Roose Bolton resembles a vampire is that, especially his Dance with Dragons kind of stuff, is that he was um, George was reading Fever Dream before he wrote the stuff. Even though, I mean, there's a lot of it with the leeches and stuff in A Clash of Kings, but I think a lot of the creepiness that people latch onto about them being similar to vampires just kind of comes from the fact that George was reading Fever Dream and was cut and pasting ideas from Fever Dream into A Dance with Dragons. Um, so it'd be tough. I mean, it's an interesting idea of whether one could pull it off. I guess it's similar to being John Malkovich, which I somehow hate. I hate being John Malkovich as a movie because they never deal with the moral implications of stealing someone's body. If you've ever read The Dark Tower, there is in the second book, The Drawing of the Three. Roland infests people's bodies in this book, and he instantly comes to the conclusion that taking over somebody's body is the worst case of murderous thievery. He called it murderous thievery. That it was the most repugnant thing he could think of, and it is. But for some reason in that movie, they just never. Everybody's just like, "Oh, you're taking over somebody's body? Okay, cool." At least with the Boltons, they're evil characters, but this idea of stealing somebody else's body, stealing their life, it's murderous thievery. Yeah. Do you feel Joe Biden's cognitive decline is a serious issue? I mean, I think I don't know if Joe Biden has a serious cognitive decline. Like, obviously, he's an old man, and old men are not as sharp as they were. I think it's mostly talked up by right wing talking points. But I don't think it's an issue with him running the country because he has advisors and people to talk to him and things like that. So the question of, do I think it's a serious issue for re-election? Do I think, like, on stage, is he going to come off as good as he could for another candidate? And I don't know. It depends who the other candidates are. It depends who his opposition is. If his opposition's Trump has just as much cognitive decline as Biden. Reagan had plenty of cognitive decline and was still bringing out zingers, right and left against Mondale, and everyone was like, "Oh man, he's still got it," even though he was just he already had Alzheimer's at that point, and yet, they made the jokes, but at the same time, they're like, "Oh, what zingers he had against Mondale." So I don't think, I think the question is I mean, we all have cognitive decline, but I think, the question is inserting this idea that Joe Biden has cognitive decline or serious cognitive decline. I think, no, it's not. He doesn't have serious cognitive decline. He has regular cognitive decline of any human being, his age or whatever. And, it's to be expected. I think he's still a very capable president. The question is just the optics. How will it look when he's trying to get reelected, or if he wants to get reelected? So it's that's the issue. I mean, when I compare to someone like Trump seems crazier. Trump seems more nuts. I don't know, but it's all about appearances to me. Because again, it kind of doesn't matter to me. Democrat is Democrat. So as long as we win elections, get our policies in place, that's the most important thing to me. Really enjoying time traveling Bran. By the way, how cool would it be if Quentyn actually managed to tame one of the dragons? Imagine Dany's reaction. Oh yeah, no, I think I think that Quentyn having one of the dragons would be an incredible story. But there's a lot of these I've thought a lot about the issues of Ariana and Aegon, and how there would be a second dance of the dragons. because so we kind of know that from an offhand comment from George that there's going to be a second Dance of the Dragons. Somebody asked him a question about the Dance of the Dragons, and he said, which one, the first or the second? So everyone kind of assumed, okay, because Aegon is in Westeros and he seems to be conquering pretty quick, that Dany's going to arrive and there's going to be a battle between them. It's like, okay, but it's not really a Dance of the Dragons unless he has a dragon of some sort. So he somehow needs to get a dragon from her. Now, Victarion may be stealing a dragon. You know, I think that the Chekhov's pork in Victarion's hull is, you know, I think it's almost certain that he's going to use that and get a dragon. Because I mean, why would you have all this pork, this whole chapter about slaughtering pigs and you know, and then, you know, for what point? He's filling his holds with hams. Okay, you've told us all this information. It seems kind of useless at the time. I hope this pays off, you know. And so, you know, I think that you've got burning ships. Some dragons are going to smell the burning pork. They're going to come over. He's going to be able to throw a net over one or whatever, chains over one, and Victarion might be able to grab a dragon. Everyone's very focused on the dragon horn, binding a dragon, and the idea is that it's not going to work, but he's going to get a dragon anyway. So Victarion has one dragon, but would Victarion's dragon somehow end up in the hands of Aegon? Doesn't seem like it. I can't think of a way that would happen. And so you've got the other dragon. And so the other dragon, if it got in the hands of Aegon, or if it got in, you know, at least it got in the hands of the Ironwoods, you know, Drink and Arch, that they could bring it back for Aegon, and then somehow he would have a dragon. I don't know who'd be the rider of that dragon. I think Quentyn coming back and it, you know, playing up the sibling rivalry storyline, which is very much part of the Arianna story. It's not part of the Quentyn story at all, which is really weird. Like, Quentyn feels no sibling rivalry, jealousy for Arianna. But Arianna is constantly thinking about Quentyn and that. So, and there being this divide, like, oh no, Dany and Quentyn are gonna come back. I better align myself with Aegon. So I think that Quentyn would be a possible way to transfer the dragon to Aegon's control, so you could actually have a Dance of the Dragons going on in Westeros. But I mean, maybe Dany would just have all the dragons herself, and they'd somehow call it a Dance of the Dragons, even though Aegon had no dragon. And it's just a Dance of the Dragons because he is Targaryen or a dragon himself. But let's see, where are we going? Nice joke, Gladys. But the problem here is that Joe Biden, you know, is he's still pro-choice. He's pro-vaccine. I mean, there's just too many other nutso things that Republicans are in this country. Like, it's I think people latch onto a few little things here and there where there's some sort of like border issue that's a holdover from some Trump policy. You got to remember that, you know, being pro open borders doesn't really get you many votes in America, and so the Republicans are about like being super anti-immigrant, and the Democrats are just about being somewhat anti-immigrant. And that's like the party positions in this country. Like, no one's really pro-immigrant in America because immigrants don't vote. You know, contrary to the Republican talking points, immigrants don't vote. So, you know, what are you going to do? Why would any, like, what's the benefit for a politician to be pro-immigrant? There's not many. There's, you know, like, you've got bleeding hearts like me who would be like, oh, that's really great, you know, but most people aren't bleeding hearts. Yeah. So, but it's a funny joke nonetheless. Um, Hey Preston, loved your content over the years, saying hello from Wales and wondering what detail from Game of Thrones that they failed to adapt do you think affected the story most? Well, obviously, I think Lady Stoneheart is probably the biggest one. The entire Brienne story, I think there's some huge thematic and plot elements that are left behind that if you're not adapting like who Brienne is and what her choices mean and what Lady Stoneheart might do for the story and the Riverlands and things like this, then you're kind of there. It's kind of missing the heart and soul of what Game of Thrones is about. I think with leaving out the Brienne story, like I know that I think Dorne is the most fun, and I think the Ironborn are really fun. Like I do love those plots. I think they're the most fun stories to read. But I can't say that like cutting out all of the Ironborn stuff and the Dorne stuff really changed the thematic nature of the Game of Thrones story. Well, I think like cutting Brienne's story, um, and which is all about kind of existentialism and choosing what's right and things like that, and choosing your own moral code and things like that. I think those are very important elements for what message the entire story is trying to make. I don't know, like looking back on Game of Thrones, like what is now the message of what the show is trying to say? Like, is it anti-war? Because at the end, it was like, well, we had a bunch of wars and they worked out okay because Bran was on top and everything's going to be great. Sansa's going to rule. Jon's going to rule. Bran's going to rule. Starks win. Tribalism is pretty good as long as you're in the right tribe. Like that's all we really need. It was all Team Stark. The point was Team Stark. Let's all, that's kind of the message at the end. I mean, they burned down the throne and everything and it melted and Bran becomes an elected king. But I'm not sure what else they're trying to say. Like if someone had to watch all the seasons of Game of Thrones and then come in the end and say like what are we supposed to learn from this? I don't know. Being like Tyrion is a good thing. I'm not sure what it is. Like I think if you're taking away Brienne, you're taking away the heart and soul. And if you're taking away Lady Stoneheart, which is the Brienne story, like the heart of the Brienne story, I think you take away the entire thematic purpose of Game of Thrones. That's just kind of my went through puberty there. That's just my opinion there. I think it was the most important thing. And George said it was the most important thing. Like he argued for Lady Stoneheart. I don't know if he was arguing so much for Doran Martell or Aegon to have huge parts or the John Connington story or whatever. I mean, those are all fun stories. I love those stories. But I don't know if they're as important. Like if you're going to cut something, yeah. I think cutting Brienne was the biggest mistake. The biggest mistake. Do you think the corporate media is egging us towards war with Ukraine? Every website is talking about war like it's inevitable. War and panic sells newspapers and TV. I mean, CNN, keep in mind that CNN exists because of the whole 24-hour news network thing exists because of Gulf War One. Like, so CNN was born out of Gulf War One, and 24-hour cable news was born out of Gulf War One. And then after that it just became everything panic, fear. I think it's hilarious that every time I travel, people are always like, "Oh my God, you're going to X country. Like, are you scared? Like, oh, be careful over there." And it's like, whatever country I'm going to is safer than America. Like, no matter where I'm going, it's safer than America. Like, I can walk most cities in the world. I can walk everywhere I want at night. Like it's you can't do that in America. Like America is a really dangerous place. You know, you've got you can't even go to school anymore without active shooter drills. Like it's amazing, and it's amazing that America is such a dangerous place, but we have this perception that the rest of the world is super dangerous, when the rest of the world is safer than America. But Ukraine, it's not like Russia's not doing bad stuff with Ukraine. So, um, on a history of this, so the EU, so a lot of this has to do with like capitalism in the EU, which I'm fine. I'm a capitalist. I'm pro EU. I think the EU is great. Um, but the EU is a competitive market where companies, you know, have to compete fairly, more or less, for your business. And so as Ukraine, you know, develops and grows and wants to become closer to Western Europe and the EU, and form, you know, trade pacts with them, that means there's open competition for Ukrainian business. Well, turns out all the former Soviet countries are filled with ethnic Russians and Russian-owned businesses. Russian-owned businesses that do not want to compete with European businesses. That, let's be honest, the European businesses are better run, operated at lower costs, better quality products, right? So what really is it's a battle between cronyism and capitalism, right? So Russian business model. This is built on cronyism and favoritism, and in Ukraine, if you're a Russian-owned business, do you want to compete in an open EU market, or do you want to have all of your business ties, you know, monopolistic and you know, be set and safe? And you know, so you've got a lot of businesses and people, you know, ethnic Russians. I'm not saying all ethnic Russians in Ukraine, but there's a lot of ethnic Russians in Ukraine, that have business ties with Russia, that want to maintain those business ties with Russia. So, you know, and Russia wants to maintain its business ties with Russian businesses in Ukraine. So you've got this incentive for Russia, which is why they took Crimea. It's why they want Eastern Ukraine. Uh, and so, you know, what can the US do? Yeah, it's really sucky that Russia is trying to take over a country like Ukraine. And what's the US's response? Well, it's mostly in the EU's best interest that Ukraine be, you know, free and whole. But obviously, you know, the US has a policy of trying to contain Russia as well. And so, yeah, Russia's doing shitty things. What can the US do? Well, other than sanctions, we can't really do much. You know, we're not going to start a war with Russia. They've got nuclear weapons. And so, you know, every once in a while, there's just not something in the news, and they need to bring something out, and they're like, because this isn't new. This has been going on for years. Um, it's been going on for a long time, but it's like, oh well, you know, people got tired of hearing about Afghanistan. People got tired of hearing about Iraq. There's not enough chaos. What kind of news can we bring up on Ukraine? Um, so it's a tough situation. I don't know if there's a win for America. It's just sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. Try to keep them out. You know, we're not going to war. That's just, but it's a tough situation. I feel bad for Ukrainians. You know, I spent some time in Ukraine. It's a really interesting country, um, really interesting people. But the western part of the country speaks one language, Ukrainian. People in Kiev speak a Kiev language, and then kind of people in the east speak. There's a lot of Russian speakers, but and then those Russians are split among a whole different group of people, because there's Russians that moved out there to start businesses, and then there's Russians that moved there because they were not in good graces with people in Moscow, and so in many ways they're kind of Russians in exile, like you know. So there's a lot of different types of people there. It's not a homogenous bunch, and it's politically very complicated. But so for some dumb American to make big, broad, sweeping, you know, generalizations about the country is also kind of, you know, dumb. But it's I do for the Ukrainians I know, which most of the Ukrainians I know are ethnically Ukrainian. They they kind of sit there like just frustrated because they're like, why is the whole world doing nothing as Russia tries to take over my country? And I'm just like, well, I I can't. I have no good answer. I have no good answer. You know, um, but the only tools we have are sanctions. Um, Unironically, think George R. R. Martin doesn't care anymore about whether he finishes. His gardening method got out of hand, not because he's trying to write an amazing story. Yeah, no, I mean, I fear this as well. Um, I think that at some point we started seeing coping language in what he was saying. He started saying things like, "Oh, lots of great authors never finish their magnum opus." Like let's look at Dune. It was never really finished, and it's like, well, let's be honest about Dune. Like people love Dune, right? The Dune sequels. I mean, yes, super Dune fans are into the Dune sequels, but Dune, like Dune as a book, like holds up because it's a story in itself. You can if Frank Herbert just wrote Dune, it would have been fine. It would still be remembered as being this incredible book. Game of Thrones doesn't work that way. You can't just have Game of Thrones and be like, "Oh, what a great story Game of Thrones is." Like, no, that would never. That like that's it's not a story by itself the way Dune is by itself. So he's starting to say like the weird coping stuff about, oh, maybe it's gonna not so bad that I don't finish. No, it'll be bad. It'll be bad, dude. Like your show is ruined. Like no, like the only thing that can save his legacy is finishing the series, and he's not going to finish the series, which is sad. Um, you know, Especially if he doesn't. It's like even Robert Jordan. Like, imagine if Brandon Sanderson didn't save Robert Jordan's legacy by finishing Wheel of Time. Would people even be remembering Wheel of Time? This unfinished series. People would just kind of go, oh, it was this promising book series, and then he started just writing these filler books, and then he died. Like that's how people would remember him. Brandon Sanderson kind of, saved his reputation by finishing the series. If George R. R. Martin doesn't want anybody to finish the series and it never gets finished, it's no he's. I mean, I'd fear for his legacy. Like it'd be done. Um, Game of Thrones was a huge thing. It was enormous, but people forget that stuff fast. Like I say, Battlestar Galactica was enormous, and now no one thinks about Battlestar Galactica at all. I bring that up a lot, but um, do you think A Song of Ice and Fire will end on a hopeful note? I do. I think it's going to. I mean, we saw the show end on a hopeful note, and I think if the ending is about Bran being the king and political reform, a new way of government moving forward, and vanquishing um, the White Walkers and stuff like that, breaking the time cycle, um, then I think it's probably pretty hopeful. Uh, I don't think it'll be completely hopeful. I mean, he likes to have his melancholy, bittersweet endings. Like I think there'll be some dark elements to the ending, or at least a lot of people died to make these sacrifices, or a lot of sacrifices were made. But I think there'll definitely be a hopeful ending to his stuff. Um, I mean, trying to think, and this is his short stories mostly had sad endings. Um, but then once he got into the 80s and his books, his novels, they had more hopeful endings. So he kind of changed as a writer, but they were all pretty negative in the 70s. But then, if you read Fever Dream or Armageddon Rag um, they're happy endings. They're sad endings, but they're happy endings. People there's a greater good that's achieved, even if the main characters themselves suffer. Um, so I think something that would be more like I'm thinking about the end of the show. Like had Sansa and Jon had sadder endings, and our Arya all had sadder endings, I think it would have felt more George R. R. Martin. You know, like had they made some big sacrifice for the greater good. Um, it almost did. It the ending didn't feel very George R. R. Martin to me. Um, so I don't know. Huh. Do you think free will is an illusion? Do you think the world is deterministic, but our knowledge of a deterministic world allows us to transcend it? Free will opinion, please. Free will is probably an illusion, but like I say, most of the scientific studies we have on our brain makes it so that the decisions that we make in our subconscious are made before our conscious mind even realizes it, and things like that. Um, I it's hard for me to somehow have the idea that we're coming up with um, decisions with no causes and just acting. Um, like if you rewound time, would I somehow do something completely different randomly? No, I don't know. Now, some people say just because the free will doesn't exist doesn't mean that everything is deterministic, because now there's discussion of whether or not subatomic particles can act truly random. And so if you rewound time, things would happen differently only because the subatomic particles did random things. So we might be in an indeterminate, non-free will universe. Like it's actually the worst of both worlds. Like we don't have free will, and there's no deterministic ending. Um, but I don't know. I've been thinking about the end of the universe a little bit lately. It's kind of depressing to think about how, like right now, based on the knowledge we have, the universe is kind of ends in a depressing way where we just kind of everything spreads out until there's until all subatomic particles are separated and nothing can be measured against itself, and then after it's not even I can't even say it's trillions, it's like number of years of like 10 to the power of, and then you go you know millions of digits on the number of years. It's incapable of even describing it, but it's kind of sad. And then they say, well, maybe then once nothing can be measured and time ceases to exist because there's no measurement, and then maybe a new universe would start. And that's still pretty depressing too, because everything we do doesn't matter, because you know it's just we're all gonna die, and the sun's gonna supernova, and the galaxies are all gonna spread apart into nothing. But the thing that gives me hope is that our knowledge of the universe is like, and how things work is very young. We've been going at this for you know 100 years, maybe 150 years, like the knowledge of relativity and quantum mechanics and stuff like that. So it's my hope is that there's something that we can't understand or explain that makes things better. There's a line uh, from Donnie Darko where he says, "I hope when I die, I breathe a sigh of relief that I have so much to look forward to." Like we all have that hope, but you know, it would be it's something different. That maybe not in the next universe won't have time and space, but it'll have flap jazz and Scoob Noob or something, so inexplicable that we can't even sit here and describe it with words. That perhaps is the underlying thing going on. And so free will versus determinism, I think there's probably not that, but it doesn't matter. You have to live your life assuming that it is, and um, that's it. Let's get what do we got here. The final Song of Ice and Fire chapter was 10,000 years in the future. Who would be the point of view, and the type of world they're living in? Well, I mean, if it's 10,000 years in the future, you've got to have the person be a Frey, right? Like it has to be like a regular Joe kind of person observing the world. And I think nobody represents kind of the average everyday person as a Frey. Like I would hate it to be a Stark, because then you've got all this implication on who they are and their house and stuff like that. I'd just like it to be, a regular person, Todd Frey, who is just, living life and observing the world. Uh, plus it's, they're the ones that are going to keep breeding and continue on. Like, so I think that's how I would do it. I don't know. Um, because I was thinking about Dune again. Like when they fast forward to, so in the Dune books, when you get to the fourth Dune book, they fast forward a few thousand years, and a character is on Atreides, and you're supposed to care about them because they have the last name Atreides. Um, and so, would they try to do the same thing, have the person with the last name Stark, just because we care about Starks, you know? Um, but I think it'd be more realistic and to have it be a Frey. Just have you know. It probably wouldn't be. It would be if it's George R. R. Martin. It would be a female character for the last. So it'd be like Maria Frey or something. Observing the story in the future, 10,000 years. Um, where do you think the Brotherhood Without Banner storyline is going? You seem to capture the mood of the small folk currently. Righteous discontent turned to blind vengeance. Um, so for a long time, and I haven't given this much thought recently, but for a long time, I really thought that the Brotherhood Without Banners would be joining the Aegon cause. Um, and it's just this idea that they were king's men and they were looking for um, and I kind of interpreted that like, well, who's the king? The king has to be Aegon. Nothing else kind of makes sense. But then, since kind of reinterpreting things with the Brienne story, um, I do take them as being more of a morally lost kind of group. Um, and so the question is would this morally lost group dabble in Aegon again? Which, I think many of them may. Um, but the Brotherhood Without Banners is also like split up. I think I talked about last time I did live stream about how there's the Brotherhood Without Banners is in two groups. There's the probably the Greenbeard faction, and then the the Lady Stoneheart faction, and we don't know where exactly the Greenbeard faction is. Some people think that the best guess is that they're hiding in the neck somewhere because they're with someone named Swampy Meg, and there was some talk about them hiding in the neck and retreating up to the neck. I think from Ryman Frey. So, um, yeah, there's a lot of discussion of which group, which group of the Brotherhood Without Banners. But I do think that in order for Aegon to quickly conquer Westeros and then have um, Dany come in and have a second dance with the dragons, you do kind of just have to have everybody go, no, we're Aegon supporters, done. And that may include the Brotherhood Without Banners. I kind of went character by character when you start thinking about, okay, what would Lemon Cloak want? What would Thomas Sevens want? Who would they support? I think a lot of it does point to Aegon, but I do think that the being morally looking for a new um, way of living life is a wrench in that. Not to mention, like when the Aegon cause landed in the Ariana sample chapters, there was clear parallels to them being like the Brotherhood Without Banners. Very clear parallels. But I don't know. I don't know. I mean, George R. R. Martin makes parallels for the sake of parallels all the time, so I don't know. Um, but I think joining the Aegon cause is a pretty good bet, or just again being lost, searching for something. What are your thoughts on the current United Kingdom government? Our right wingers are falling out of favor due to a bunch of scandals. The PM. Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about the UK. Like, obviously, I've heard about Boris Johnson's parties and how that in America we've gone so like that. Like the party scandal might have been something if this were like the 90s in America, but now we're in the place where the president of the United States can have sex with a porn star, while his newborn baby is at home, and everybody's like shrugs, like, oh, that's nothing, like what? Like the president of the United States had sex with a porn star while his newborn baby was at home. It doesn't matter to me. So yeah, he had a bunch of parties during COVID, and it's a big scandal. It's just such a different world, the way Americans think now. That's like, again, if we're the '90s, maybe, but um, I think I think that from an American perspective, I think you're from I don't know. I think I think Brexit was a big mistake. I think it's going to have long-term economic consequences on the UK. I think I think that it was it's just a disastrous way that a lot of British people see themselves in the world, trying to march, like go into isolationism. I don't know if that's really the right path for anyone. Which is, I mean, I guess it's just because eventually we kind of know that if the UK keeps going to isolationism, it's going to lead to Scottish independence. It's going to lead to, even probably Northern Irish independence. And then, England just becomes a more and more irrelevant country, which perhaps is a fitting end to the great empire of the British, in the same way as the Portuguese are now this tiny little unimportant has been kind of place. This won't happen in our lifetime, but it's definitely the march. Or the UK could turn things around and try to enter the world stage again and rejoin with the EU, but I don't see that happening. But over a bunch of parties, I don't know if that's going to have a lot. People will forget. I mean, even in the UK, people are going to forget that he had a bunch of parties. He'll lose an election cycle, and then the next election cycle, they'll come back. The Conservatives in the UK seem pretty unstoppable because the Labour Party can never get their act together. But I don't really know that much about the UK too much. But it just from the kind of big structural issues that I see is just this idea of wanting to become isolationist. Like, maybe those people are all old and they're all going to die, and the new generation of UK people are going to be different. I mean, everybody says that for every young generation, but I don't know. It doesn't look great. It doesn't look great for the UK. I can't say I have any positive things to say. I mean, I don't have many positive things to say about the future of America, but it's as an American, you just got to keep fighting until you die and be disappointed. But no, Crackpot Theory. Danny's red door memories are from a previous timeline, and this revelation will be a key. Danny's thoughts. That's a fascinating idea. So I was thinking a lot about visions being, so a lot of what visions are from a previous timeline. So one of the things that I'm going to bring up in the next Bran story is when Bran has his dream with the three-eyed crow, he sees on spires like the bones of 1,000 dead dreamers. Now, 1,000 dead dreamers is a lot of dreamers. Now, granted, 1,000 metaphorically is used all the time in Ice and Fire. It doesn't necessarily mean a literal 1,000. It can mean a lot less than 1,000. It can mean a lot more than 1,000. But if you went with 1,000, that's a lot of dreamers, like more than there should be, because the war was 8,000 years ago with the White Walkers. So what? Each three-eyed crow would only have a reign of 8 years? That doesn't seem right. There should be like 300 dreamers, right? Unless we're talking about loops of the timeline. If we're talking about loops of the timeline, then 1,000 dreamers kind of makes sense. But then we're getting elements of previous timelines in visions. So you wonder about all these kind of things, like, wait, what did in the House of the Undying, or for example, are those visions from the future, or are they visions from a previous timeline? Is that why they can be somewhat inaccurate because because that didn't really happen? When you look at the description of the Red Wedding, there are things that are very just weird and off about it, and it's like, well, was that a previous idea of the Red Wedding that a previous version of Bran had? Yeah, I don't know, but the thing is that Dany mentions the Red Door prior to her first vision. So unless she's having some sort of vision before having the Red Door, or those elements are in her mind prior to that, it'd be tough to think about. I mean, we don't know how many visions, if she has any visions before her visions of a Game of Thrones, but that would make me think that the Red Door is a real place that she experienced in this timeline, that she doesn't mention any visions prior to talking about the Red Door in Daenerys 1, A Game of Thrones. And yes, the Red Door shows up in visions later, but she talked about it before. So, but I think it's a fascinating idea to think about whether these visions of the future are really versions of the previous timeline. I mean, one would think it would be at least the last timeline, the timeline that the previous time traveling Bran experienced, that he saw and he can kind of throw out. Well, this happened last time. Is me sending you a message going to have you do it or prevent it? I don't know. Did Rhaego exist in one of those timelines? I don't know. Because that Rhaego vision is pretty crazy. With him with the silver hair and tan skin. Like, did that happen in the last timeline? Did that happen in any previous timeline? If it happened if it happened before the last timeline, how does time traveling Bran know about it? From the previous time traveling Bran's vision? Does he just keep like passing on the vision? Like, did Rhaego exist like 500 iterations before, but he passed it on in the timeline so many times? It's a lot of mind bending stuff, and I realize at some point, you can't make it too complicated, because eventually George R. R. Martin has to explain it to people. Like, not that I don't think that George R. R. Martin is capable of very complicated thoughts, but he would want to be able to explain it to everybody, and so that's how I make it a little different. Watching your fantasy or sci-fi stream, if it was fantasy, it would necessitate religious explanation, chosen one's grand plan. That's not George. Yeah. I agree with this explanation. There's a lot of people that approach Ice and Fire looking at legends and as something that actually happened. And I just don't think that's how George sees any of this. I think in my previous stuff, like specifically my geology discussion, we talk about how fundamentally Game of Thrones, Ice and Fire is different from Lord of the Rings. Like, when Lord of the Rings says that Iluvatar like did something and fought Morgoth and all of this kind of stuff, and there was a legitimate god. I mean, there's a fucking Christian sky god in Lord of the Rings. There's no questioning that. Like, that really happened. There really was a Christian sky god in Lord of the Rings. But George R. R. Martin would never have that kind of history. Like, he would never have literal truth of religion be the past. He would have some sort of ambiguity, and he's written that a million times. Like, he talks about Sam saying, like, well, this is the history that we know, but a lot of maesters question it because we only have things written down from this point on, and that matches the real world. So I agree, because I think you're like, no, because I think your definition of fantasy and my definition of fantasy are similar. I don't know about George's definition of fantasy. I think George thinks fantasy is no different from sci-fi, and it's just people with swords. It's just swords and dragons is what sci-fi is, versus like, you know, there being a legitimate explanation to something versus it just being magic for the sake of magic. Um, what is my most right-wing opinion? My most right-wing opinion is probably I don't really care that much about unions, but that's mainly because I believe the government should be providing all of the services and protections that unions provide. I think unions are band-aids to deeper problems. You know, like when people are like, "Oh, unions like prevent people from like working too many hours," and it's like, well, that should be a fucking law. But so that's probably my most right-wing opinion is that I'm trying to think of anything else. Like if I were in Europe and somebody said like, what's your most right-wing opinion, it would be something like, I'm completely pro free trade and I don't see much problem with genetically modified food. But in America, that's not how our political structure is. So like in America, the centrists are pro free trade and the far right and the far left are anti free trade. So like, for instance, Trump was anti free trade. And so like the centrists are the ones that are for free trade. So it's an odd thing. While in Europe, right wingers are for free trade and left wingers are for protectionism. While in America, the wings are for protectionism and the center is for free trade. So I mean, I'm really pro free trade. Europeans really care about genetically modified food. Americans don't care as much. And so I'm perfectly fine with GMO. I think that's probably a pretty right wing opinion I have. Trying to think anything else like, but one thing is the right wingers don't really have many opinions anymore. They just kind of they're kind of just a Christian power party that wants to do the exact opposite of Democrats, and to regain power, and so I don't know if they have many beliefs anymore. At least in America, I don't know what right wingers and Okay, all right. I think I got through all the super chats, so I can get to this one thing I wanted to talk about. So somebody brought up in the chat before we even started about whether Jinglebell was the stallion that mounts the world, which is on the face of it a really kind of ridiculous idea, right? Like, why would Jinglebell be the stallion that mounts the world? But I want to bring up why this is actually kind of funny. It's more amusing than anything else. So let's see here. Let's bring up. Here we go. So let me close this up. I was just searching for the right thing, and I remember that there was a razor in it. So as you guys know, the stallion that mounts the world is the prophecy about it's kind of the stand-in for Azor Ahai among the Dothraki. And so they're talking about the thunder of his hooves. And here's the description from Daenerys 5 of Game of Thrones. As swift as the wind he rides, and behind him his Khalazar covers the earth, men without number, with araks shining in their hands like blades of razor grass. Fierce as a storm this prince will be. His enemies will tremble before him, and their wives will weep tears of blood and rend their flesh in grief. The bells in his hair will sing his coming, and the milkmen in the stone tents will fear his name. The old woman trembling looked at Dany almost as if she were afraid. The prince is riding, and he shall be the stallion who mounts the world. Now, obviously, Jinglebell being the stallion that mounts the world, or anybody, well, actually, in my belief, anybody being the stallion that mounts the world is a dumb idea. But Jinglebell being the stallion that mounts the world is especially silly idea, as he's mentally challenged and he's dead. However, if we go into these things, there are some things where you could say, well, that's that kind of fits. Not everything, but there's some things. So, okay, swift is the wind he rides. Nah, Jinglebell, he's not really swift. Behind him, a Khalasar that'll cover the earth. I mean, one could say that, all right, there's a lot of Freys. Freys might populate stuff. You could make an argument. Men without number, one could make that argument that there's a lot of Freys and they could get a lot of support. Arax shining in their hands. Well, that doesn't really fit him. There's no reason Freys or anybody in Westeros would have that. Fierce as a storm, this prince will be. So this idea that he's a prince. Now Aegon would have been the heir if Stevron Frey's wife actually had a bastard, or Stevron was not actually the father of Ryman Frey. And keep in mind, Ryman Frey and none of his descendants really look like Freys. So you could make the argument, like when I say they don't look like Freys, meaning there's nothing in the text that says that they look like Walder, and there's nothing in the text that says they look like weasels, which is the main thing. So when you think about the first descendants of the first son of Stevron Frey is Ryman Frey. Ryman's kind of fat, doesn't really look like a weasel. His kids are Edwin, Black Walder, and Peter. And they're just described as skinny looking. Peter's described as ugly with a lot of warts and pimples, but nothing particularly Frey about them. So one could argue that, we know nothing about. I think Stevron Frey married a swan or something. We don't know anything about his wife, but one could make the argument that Ryman Frey is actually a bastard, and that Aegon, Jinglebell, is the true heir to the twins, and that he's a prince in that respect. His enemies will tremble before him. Well, I don't know if Jinglebell has too many enemies, but this is the interesting thing. And their wives will weep tears of blood and rend their flesh in grief. And that specific imagery is very Catelyn. Like if Jinglebell does have one enemy, it's Catelyn who kills him. And there is some imagery of her, weeping blood and tearing at her flesh. When she dies, she scrapes her face open because she's in so much anguish. I forget the imagery of her weeping blood. It rings a bell, and I'm trying to remember what describes her as that. But I suppose maybe as well as if you scrape here, it would look like you're weeping blood. So Catelyn would have that. So that's there. The bells in his hair will sing with his coming. Well, Jinglebell has bells on top of his head with his hat. So. And the milkmen will fear his name. Now that's also kind of interesting because milkmen and stone tents just means, Westerosian castles, but they will fear his name. They don't fear Jinglebell, but they fear his name. They fear Aegon. Aegon, the name Aegon brings fear to people, but Jinglebell, might not. Like Jinglebell might not bring fear, but his name brings fear. And so, that kind of fits as well. So there is, I'm not going to say, it fits. He's also dead and useless, and what's the point? But, and all of this stuff about Eric's and having people follow him and stuff like that don't fit. But I will grant that it's not and it's not just me twisting the passage that much. He has bells in his hair. This weeping tears of blood and rending the flesh, that's very Catelyn. His name being a fearful name, being Aegon, that's not bad. That's a pretty good fit. The first stuff doesn't fit very well. But so as funny as and ridiculous as when people say Jinglebell is the Stallion that mounts the world, it's not, it's not bad. It's not bad as a theory. There's worse theories, but that's where we are. Let's see. If feudalism occurred in North America like it did in Europe, how do you think it would reshape the continent? Huh. This is hmm some questions here. Um, this is a big thing about like trying to re-examine, like think about how feudalism in general. Um, because in a sense, like feudalism eventually, you know, we think about history in Europe and we think about things starting out with people owning land and then this property getting rising up and getting collected um, into larger states, and then them forming some sort of political um, structure, and that a nation state can form from what originally was a feudalistic holding. Um, and so we kind of get that structure of things in Europe, right? That that what we know of as France and England and Scotland and um, Germany were originally like um, feudalistic holdings. Um, but trying to think that, but would that really hmm, affect America too much? Uh, there is a kind of big difference when you think about European nation state borders versus United States nation state borders. I mean, one big thing is that if you look at Europe, there's no straight lines when it comes to borders, because borders aren't decided through treaties. Borders are usually decided through geography. Like, oh, there's a mountain there, there's a river there, so that's going to be your border. While the United States and its states have a bunch of straight lines and everything, um, meaning that like people weren't actually, well, people were living there, the American Indians, but when borders were decided, they were decided in an office somewhere with people drawing lines, um, rather than them developing um, naturally like that. Uh, and so, I mean, for that reason, you end up having um, problems in Europe as well, because the borders, when actually you have cities and settlements, they usually happen on both sides of a river, or when there's a mountain. Mountains don't just come up like this; they're usually a big kind of valleys, up and down, up and down, up and down, and so you have people living in the valleys, and so you have societies literally cut in half that were very culturally similar. And so Europe has always had this big problem of uh, border communities feeling like they're not part of the main nation state, or they're part of some sort of culture across the mountain or across the river. You can look at almost every border in Europe and you see this. Like if you look at Spain's border with France, I mean that's where you're going to find the Catalans, and you look at Germany's border with France, you've got um, uh, all the Strasbourg kind of I'm forgetting the German names because there's actually several, but for all these people that are pretty much ethnically half German, half French, who speak languages that are kind of a bit of German and a bit of French. Um, so, um, I mean, I imagine if like feudalism occurred in America, that you might have a similar kind of situation where you would you would have people choosing natural borders over time. Um, but I don't know, it's tough because we always, the United States started with a federal system and then it gained its land. Um, hmm. So, I mean, it's a big alternate history kind of way of thinking about things. Like, what if everything? I mean, it's really more of a discussion of what if the United States really did have independent states for a long time? Would they have eventually come together? And the answer is probably no. you know, uh, usually things go the other way. People start splitting up rather than. I mean, there's some example. The European Union kind of comes together, but for the most part, if you give people independence, they usually don't want to give it up. So that's probably be the way. Is if feudalism happened just in the sense that there'd be independent kind of entities for a while, isolated for a while, having their own currency, having their own banks. You wouldn't have all the Alexander Hamilton things of unifying a country. Alexander Hamilton is credited with unifying America by creating the central bank of the United States and buying all of the state's debts, and then having everybody be bound under single currency and single debt system. And it's really the thing that kept America together. So if it rose under feudalism, would it have the same sort of thing? Probably not. Though I don't know if the economic system of feudalism would have affected America's future. I don't know. I love Walder Frey. Hid Rosalind, his winter rose, pale blue rose. Oh, that's interesting. To test the Starks, revealed they're in vain and wanted to come out on top. Yeah, I mean, there's as much as Walder Frey is supposed to be this big villain. When you actually examine and he seems like a big jerk and everything, but when you actually examine what he does and how he cares for his family, and how savvy he is, if he's written from a different perspective, you could definitely make Walder Frey into I don't know if you could make him into a hero, but you could make him into somebody that's considered more of a protagonist. So it's definitely a possibility. It's just that we're given this perspective of him being physically repugnant and him being a jerk, and but he cares about his family more than anybody else does. I don't see the Starks letting all Starks live at Winterfell. I don't see any other houses doing that. He lets every Frey live the twins. Every Frey. That's almost unheard of in feudalism, right? He doesn't kick out anybody. It's pretty nice, even if he is a jerk, and even if he did do the Red Wedding. Yeah, I mean, it depends on your definition of feudalism. I mean, there are people on this one. There are people that argue that feudalism never existed, or not how we perceive it. But if we're talking about a system where people are given land in return for a required taxation and military service, probably not in the same sense. In a pyramid structure, probably not in the same sense. I mean, for a long time, the United States only really collected taxes on duties and stuff like that. So, a lot of American history was very libertarian back when there actually was a frontier. So, you just kind of went out there and you killed your American Indians, and you took your land, and you lived unmolested, on your own for a while. Imagine if Antonio Brown came out dead serious and explained everything has been performance art, satire. It might break social media. Let me see here. I've got to. Oh. I wish I knew more about all of the crazy antics of Antonio Brown. I see these news stories about him, and he seems pretty nuts. I wish I if it were. I mean, this is the thing, is if any of these Kanye West comes out and says this is all performative art, I was just being nuts. But I think that a lot of these people really do want attention, right? And so that you know, they like acting pretty nuts in order to get attention on themselves. I mean, that's of course like part of the. It's thrilling, right? It's kind of addictive to be in the light. Um, yeah, I don't know. By the way, I didn't even check. Did Buffalo win? Buffalo lost. Of course they did. Of course they did. Of course they did. Um, let's see, where are we at? Da, da, da. Before I get to other things, I just want to make check. People get angry at me if I don't get to all my super chats. Vikings, yes. Ray Lewis murdered, yes. Trans women, yes. Dirk survived. Bolt on. Da, da, da. Love your content. Um, yeah, a lot of depressing. Okay. All right. Now we can move on to some other fun stuff. What? What is this? What is this? um, somebody becomes Preston Jacobs. Yes. Oh wait, this was me. I thought it was somebody intimidating me, imitating me. It was actually me. Um, I thought Carmine was gonna call in after his Taco Bell break. We'll see what happens here. Dude, I read Dark Tower. I did read Dark Tower. I'm a big fan of the first four Dark Tower books, and then it kind of falls apart. Um, book five on. I mean, especially book five is still okay, but book six and seven are kind of nuts. Um, the For those that haven't read Dark Tower is a fascinating thing, almost in the meta story behind Dark Tower. So, um, you normally think Stephen King, you think okay, horror author, but he wrote this fantasy series called The Dark Tower, which is seven books plus some extra stuff, and he got this idea in the 60s like, oh, I want to read Lord of the Rings happened. I want to do a series like Lord of the Rings. So it's this fascinating story about this gunslinger who used to be part of this society of knights, but they're all gunslingers instead. So it's like Old West, and it's all post-apocalyptic. So it's a post-apocalyptic world with this ex-knight gunslinger trying to find the Dark Tower, which we eventually find is the tower at the center of the multiverse that keeps everything together, which is, pretty cool. So he writes this first book and he starts putting together in the late 70s, early 80s, publishes the first book in 81, 82. It publishes the second book in 87, the third one in 91, 90, and then the fourth one in 94. There's a lot of time in between books, much like Ice and Fire. And then things are going along, and Stephen King gets hit by a fucking van, right? So he gets hit by a van, and he has this huge crisis. Like, oh my God, I almost died. I better not let the Dark Tower end. Dark Tower, I better finish the Dark Tower. So he wrote the last two books in 2003 and 2004. He wrote three books in 2 years. And the last three books are really rushed, completely different writing style, more like his horror books. They're page turner kind of horror books. They don't have the same kind of care that the first four books have, which are in a completely different writing style than Stephen King is normal. It's very deliberate. He's thinking about every sentence versus I'm just going to write stream of consciousness. So he writes these last three books in stream of consciousness. And then he also comes up with this idea that he wrote this book called The Regulators right before getting hit by the van. And in The Regulators, the characters are getting run over by vans. And so he kind of has this idea that, oh my God, the regulators were after me. What if all of my stories are interconnected in a multiverse, and I'm in that multiverse, and the regulators have come out and they're like trying to destroy, and it's all part of the Dark Tower. So he so he decides to merge all of his books into the Dark Tower at the end. And he pulls in 9/11 and himself. The characters end up meeting Stephen King, and it's the regulators are in it, and Salem's Lot, and it goes freaking buck wild. And it also kind of gets really disappointing because it's very clear that in the beginning, Walter and Flag are different characters. Walter is a servant of Flag. And then at the end, he's like, no, they're all Flag. It doesn't matter. But you're like, but Walter was a different character. Like, you specifically said he was a different character. No, they're all Flag. Okay. Like, all right. And so it just kind of happens. So it was sloppily ended. But I did really love the Dark Tower, and I was really excited about the end. But yeah, it's hard. I think it was also, he built it up so much. Like, how do you end such an epic story? And it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Like, it got very exciting when you hit the 5th book and like Callahan from Salem's Lot shows up, and you're like, whoa, where is this story going? And then it just gets, he doesn't know how to end it. So I mean, he ends it, but the the villain is defeated really, really quite easily, and it just kind of ends. So I used to love it. I remember the Dark Tower, the characters go to Stephen King, the actual real world, and tell him to get writing so that they can figure out what they're supposed to do. Yes. This is what the 6th book is about, Song of Susanna. It's really quite insane that the characters leave the story and then in a meta sense go visit Stephen King, who hasn't yet been hit by the van of the regulators who are servants of Flag. Like, it's really insane. It's insane. Oh my, Attack on the Titan. People mention Attack on the Titan. I have not seen it. I'm absolutely sure that Carmine has. So Carmine might be able to tell me about Attack on the Titan here, but I have not seen it yet. And this is definitely it. Like, cocaine is a hell of a drug. Like, Stephen King, like, and what I love about Stephen King is that he's so honest about it too. He's just like, no, I was just on all these drugs. Like, everything about I think Stephen King's life is actually much more interesting than many of Stephen King's stories. Like, the fact that, like, his first book was Carrie, and he wrote a bunch on it and then threw it away, and his wife found it in the trash and was like, this is really good. But it's like, it was like, his first chapter of Carrie is like about her getting her period, and goes on and on and on for pages and pages. Like, it's pretty insane that his wife like picked that, like, the beginning of Carrie, out of the trash and was like, no, this is really good. All right. Attack on the Titan. Have to add it to the list. Don't be depressed. Don't be depressed. Everything's okay. Are we talking about Lord of the Ring, or A Song of Ice and Fire finishing? Or are we talking about something deeper? This is the thing. I think Wolves of Calla, when we're talking about Dark Tower, Wolves of Calla is still a really good story by itself. It's kind of a redo of Storm of the Century. Because we're talking about like sacrificing kids and stuff like that to a mystical group of people that like comes in every year. Like, it's the same kind of story, right? And they have to decide if this is the sacrifice they need to make. It's well paced. It's a good story, but it's in a completely different writing style. Like, you leave Wizard and Glass, like leaving Wizard and Glass, and then coming into Wolves of Calla, like, it's jarring. It's like it's by a completely different author. Could other characters have been Hodor or exist or otherwise exist between timelines. Patchface drowning, perhaps connecting to other. I think lots of characters. I personally think that lots of characters have been Hodored. I don't think they've been. I don't think they've been destroyed to the same respect as Hodor. I mean, perhaps Patchface, but I think lots of characters have been. I mean, I think Jojen specifically has received visions from the Three-Eyed Crow, and so one would have to say that Jojen, perhaps Bran knows not to try to rest that body and screw up their mind as much, but certainly Jojen is getting visions from the Three-Eyed Crow, and I'll explain in Time Traveling Bran why Jojen is along and what his purpose is. I'm about halfway through finishing the last Time Traveling Bran, and the first half is mainly about why Jojen and Mira are along for the ride, and it relates to essentially Hodoring. So I think it's coming. I think my first half of Time Traveling Bran is okay. I'm not sure how my second half is going to come, because second half is I've got to make bigger statements. Jinzo, are you done with your Taco Bell? Okay, so I nominate Tywin Lannister and Robert Baratheon for team up to go talk to George about writing. Could you imagine, like what? Would Tywin start his house on fire, or would he be like, "You're not my author. You didn't create me. What? What did you?" So this is interesting because we don't know if it's the Three-Eyed Crow. Obviously, hello there. Hold on a second. Okay, you there?
Yeah, sorry, I've been done for a while. I just wanted you to have some time with your fans before I jumped in
Sure,
here.
sure.
By the way, it's not Attack on the Titan. It's
Attack on the Titan? What?
I think you're doing that on purpose. It's like when my mom called it Pokemon. Like, come on, man.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think once when I was younger, I came home with like an Avengers comic, and my father was like, "What's that? The Toxic Avenger?" And I was like, "No, no." There is something to, yeah, like purposely getting things wrong. Um, Thoughts on Euron being visited by the Three-Eyed Crow? Well, we don't know if it was the Three-Eyed Crow visiting Euron. He certainly has a vision about flying, and there is a question on when that vision happened. Certainly when he's young, but yeah, it's a weird thing. I'll talk about Euron. I promise I'll talk about Euron in Time Traveling Bran Part 5. But I haven't yet formulated my kind of big world thoughts on everything. Because the interesting thing about Euron is that, if he's visited, it's when he's a boy, meaning it happened well before Bran was conceived. So I mean, Time Traveling Bran could obviously go back to any time, but he doesn't want to affect too much stuff that would prevent his own existence. So that's the worst thing when you're trying to do something and then you stop yourself from existing. You know what I'm saying? Cause your mom to fall in love with you. Mm-mm, mm-mm. So Carmine, is Attack on the Titan really good? You've muted yourself. Oh, he's out. He must have something busy. Something came up. He Oh, he's back. Hey there. Okay.
me. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Whoops.
yeah, you're back.
Just
You're back.
then it disconnected me. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, but I removed that little thing I had at the end of Book of Boba Fett, the last episode. The thing I talked about how the kids modify themselves, but the adults didn't. I removed that because listening back to that, it's so dumb. This was a conversation topic I had the other day with a couple other YouTubers because someone asked me like, do I ever remove anything from the podcast when we do it? The audience doesn't know this. I'm just gonna blow the lid on this right now. Preston does this thing. I don't know if he's fucking with me. I remember this. I will always remember this. 4 years ago, I said something. I forgot what the topic was, but I used the word anarchist, and you said that's not a word.
What?
Like, what? Preston, I swear to God, you said that to me. You
I said that anarchist wasn't a word?
You said that anarchist was not a word. I swear to God, you said that.
That's really odd. I must have been high. What
no.
Kind of...
And I'm like, really? And then I go back, and as I'm editing, I'm like, you know what? I'll remove it because I don't want to like sound like an idiot. And then and as I'm removing, I'm like, I'm googling. I'm like, wait a minute, it is a word. What the fuck? What the fuck?
Are you sure it was anarchist?
Bro, I swear to God, I'm not even making the joke. And I'm like, yeah, Preston does this. You've done this very few times too, and I feel like you're messing with me because I'll go and Google it. I'm like, yeah, it is a word. What do you mean?
I must have been. I don't know what I was doing. I must have had a Crunchwrap Supreme, and had been recovering.
Those chalupas, man, I love those fucking chalupas. There's something about the chalupas specifically that's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a deep fried gordita. What are you gonna? How are you not gonna like it? By the way, on this super chat, I did a long thing on Ukraine earlier. So I know we might have joined later, but essentially, you know, it's just you know, Russian-owned businesses in Ukraine don't want to compete with EU businesses, and so you know they want to take bits of Ukraine back, and you know the UK and EU can't do much except sanction. So it's a bad situation. I mean, obviously, I feel for Ukrainians. It's a rough situation. So, but we did a long thing on that. So what is Attack on the Titan about?
That's an interesting question. You should. I'm very good at this. I'm very good at recommending people shows after talking to them for a long period of time. Like I know people's tastes.
Yeah. Carmine, did you drop off? Man, that chalupa's been killing him. I've lost you, dude. Well, we'll talk about the Taiwan DMV. So, in order to get a license here in Taiwan, you're back. You're back.
Yeah, sorry about that. Where did I cut out? For some reason, it's not working lately. I don't know why.
I don't know what you're doing, man.
I don't remember. You said a couple years ago that you like Death Note, right?
Death Note, yeah, I like Death Note a lot, actually.
So
I actually even like Death Note's last third. I like Death Note's last third quite a bit. Because it's so mind bending that I can't believe they actually put something like to screen that's so complicated, where I'm just like, wait, what? He borrowed that Death Note and then tore a piece out of it and then replaced it for a different copy of the Death Note, and then he used you know, like it's a remarkably complicated ending where you're like, wait, did M and N know what each other were doing when he sacrificed himself and took off his helmet? Did M know? It's you have to go back and like I've done it several times, going back and reading the description again and being like, oh right, that's what happened. Oh, that's so complicated. Oh, but
I, would you like Attack on Titan? I maybe. I
mm,
feel like you would like parts of it. The whole thing, I don't know. Would you like Berserk? Yes, the Golden Age movies on Netflix. That you
okay,
would
okay,
like. Don't watch the 2016, 2017 anime. It's trash.
all right.
Sorry, Forrest.
So I'm quickly gonna be because I want to talk about with you some more Boba Fett and some Peacemaker and Witcher a little bit before. But I want to talk about. I had to go to the Taiwan. It wasn't really their DMV. It was kind of in order to get a license in Taiwan, you've got to go and have a kind of a physical, not like a turn your head and cough kind of thing, but like you've got to go in and they have to check your eyes, and then they have a few physical challenges, and then and then they give you your they approve you to then get a license. So, you arrive at this office and it's I came with passport photos, and you've got to get like a special, even smaller piece of passport photo, even smaller. So they have the booth in the back. And anyway, so I do that, and then I'm really flustered, you know, trying to use the machine. Hey there, Carmine, you're
I'm
still
sorry.
muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Sorry about that. So I'm sorry. I need
So
to let me mute
yeah, no,
myself and
no, no
listen to
worries,
this.
no worries. So it's super crowded in there, and I'm kind of flustered. And you've got to wear a mask everywhere. So, and my Chinese is not perfect by any means. So, it's pretty hectic in there. And then you're up for the eye sight thing, and I don't wear glasses, and so like my eyes have been perfect up until maybe about the past 4 years, and they've been kind of dropping off. And so I really should get some glasses, but I haven't yet. And so I'm seeing if I can pass the eyesight challenge, the eyesight test, to get my driver's license without having the glasses. And so, I put my face up to the eyesight thing, and the steam from my mask like shoots up while I breathe and like fogs up all of the the little viewmaster that you look in. So, I'm just like I'm trying to like wipe it off and like determine. It was really tough. And I passed, but I passed the eyesight thing, but it was a close thing. And then they make you do some squats, and you've got to do some squats, and you've got to do some weird stuff with your hand, opening and closing them, and then they pass you for your physical, and you can get a license. But it was I think it's mainly to keep old people from they don't want old people that are too gone, who can't see, who can't like move their legs and move their hands, uh, um, uh, driving. Um, Thoughts on Peng Shui? Uh, yeah, I mean, so this came up for those that don't know. Peng Shui is a tennis player who, um, after a whole bunch of female tennis stars had been saying that they were, sexually abused and sexually harassed in their career, the Chinese tennis star Peng Shui uh, decided to, well, at least on her social media account, accused a government official of forcing her into sex, and then Peng Shui just disappeared. And so there's a lot of questions, like, was her account originally hacked? Did it really happen? And if so, like, why has she disappeared from social media now? Where is she? How come no one's seen her? Like, various people have said, like, oh, I just had a conversation with her last month, like Yao Ming. But, you're like, really? And so some guy like walked into the Australia Open with a T-shirt that said, "Where is Peng Shui?" And he had to take the T-shirt off because apparently you're not allowed political slogans um, in the inside. So I think it's pretty horrible. I mean, if I'm going with probabilities, it's probable that she was being sexually harassed by some powerful person, and that, when she called people out, like whether she did that or not, they told her, you better stay off of social media, period, and watch yourself. So, hopefully she's safe, at least alive, but clearly she crossed some people and now does not want to cross them again. Um, so um, squats. Do you even lift, bro? I don't lift much. I do some pull-ups and dips, every once in a while, but no, not too much. The um that's the thing is, if you so about giving out licenses, like, yeah, I mean, that's the thing is the physical test was not very difficult. It'd be I mean, I'm a tall guy, so squats are harder, but for a short person, is a squat very doesn't is a squat very difficult? I don't even know. And if you're allowed to have glasses during the test, like, can't everybody get glasses? So yeah. So, but there's some pretty crazy driving here. I would say Taiwanese people are really, really nice and wonderful people, unless they're in a car or on a motorbike, and then they hate you. It's like they really think my kid is cute, unless I'm crossing the street, and then they want to run him over in his stroller. So, why is missing person even considered political? Yeah, it's a very, very good question. I mean, isn't everything political then? I mean, that's the funny thing is people talk about, like, should we talk about politics with regards to morality? Isn't everything political moral? Isn't everything moral and all actions political? I mean, everything blends together. So it's now this is also pretty funny. Um, so first of all, thoughts on him. On First of all, fuck that guy. Okay, first of all, fuck that guy. But also, fuck the Australian Open. Okay, like, fuck you guys for having an exception in the first place, and then getting caught with your pants down, letting some unvaccinated person compete, and then try to come up with some, like, bullshit, like, after excuse to, like, kick him out. Like, fuck all of you guys. Okay, you should have had a requirement from the beginning that you need to be vaccinated to compete. Period. The fact that you had an exception, and then he filled out some paperwork wrong, and then it was a big issue and people were angry, like, and then you changed your mind, and it's like, come on, like, fuck all those people. Fuck him, fuck them, fuck them all. They're all fucking horrible. Just, like, how hard is it to just get vaxxed, and how hard is it to require it? It's not fucking hard. Carmine's back. And I still can't hear him. Man, dude. Sorry. Dun, 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 dun. But yes, Dancing Vero, I completely agree that, how can you live a life that's not political, especially if you live in a democracy, right? Like, and you're one of the people that vote. Like, it's tough. Like, I could understand if you lived in a dictatorship and you have no chance of leaving and there's nothing you can do. Have I ever read Tartar Steppe, Men Seeking Glory to Waste Their Lives, waiting for a war versus a mythical foe that never comes? I have not. Let's check out this Tartar Steppe. The Tartar Steppe, the deserts of Tartar. Oh my. The plot of the novel is Drogo's lifelong wait for a great war in which his life and the existence of the fort can prove its usefulness. The human need for giving life meaning and a soldier's desire for glory are themes of the novel. Interesting. Drogo is posted to the remote outpost overlooking the desolate Tartar desert. He spends his career waiting for the barbarian horde rumored to live beyond the desert. Curious, curious. Without noticing, Drogo finds that in his watch over the fort, he has let years and decades pass, and that while his old friends in the city have had children, married, lived full lives, he has come away with nothing except solidarity with his fellow soldiers in their long, patient vigil. When the attack of the Tartars finally arrives, Drogo gets ill, and the new chieftain of the fortress dismisses him. Drogo, on his way back home, dies lonely at an inn. Oh, I mean, that's a funny. See, it's funny though that the if we're accepting in this plot that the Tartar that the barbarian invasion is a real threat and that one needs soldiers there, his life wouldn't be wasted. Like he was, even though he himself never fought, like him being there and maintaining the fort and maintaining the watch, like, was an essential thing that allowed his friends to have children and full lives. So I mean, there's a full sacrifice. So it's funny, framing his life as a big disappointment when in fact, like, on another level, like he is, there's nothing too wasted about it. In academia, there's this thought of like what happens when your thoughts never, like, your research is proved wrong. Is that considered a failure? And this actually is the case with Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky, though most of you may know him from his political views, Noam Chomsky was a very prominent linguist. And he had different beliefs about the human mind and where language developed and why humans learn language and things like that. And almost all of Chomsky's work has been proven incorrect. It's there's no Chomsky school left because almost all linguists have come to the conclusion through brain scans and experiments that Chomsky was wrong. So Chomsky essentially believed that there's that humans have an innate ability for language, that there is an organelle sub part of the brain designed and specialized for language. We know this to be not true. Okay, that there is no structure in the brain specially designed for language. We know this because through years of mostly Russian linguist research, they did a lot of study on brains based on brain damage from World War II vets. So because you sent so many millions of people off to war, a lot of people got bullet holes in different parts of the brain. And so a Russian linguist named Luria, he mapped a lot of the human brain and said, okay, well, if you get hit here, there's like a 20% chance you're going to lose your language ability. If you get hit here, there's like a 40% chance you're going to lose your language ability. It was all percentages, because some people lose parts of their brain and nothing happens, and the other people lose that same part and lose their ability to speak. So we find out that language is actually pretty fluid. It's stored in different places of the brain for different people. And so there absolutely is no language structure in the brain. And, Chomsky is wrong. Like Chomsky, humans do not have an innate ability for language. Like we also know that like humans in isolation do not develop language. So now the question is Chomsky a failure for having a wrong theory? And the answer is no. Like the idea is that in some sort of like dialectical sense that, you need to have someone make a hypothesis to prove that hypothesis wrong, to then gain more knowledge and to really understand structurally how the universe works. Like these are important things. Like it's important to have it's important to have information and to dedicate your life to something and then have it all be proved wrong, because now we know that the opposite is true. So, like, was Chomsky's career, and Chomsky is, a very famous linguist, like, was Chomsky's career a waste? And I would say no. Like, his linguistic career was very important and very useful. Yeah. So on this part, I don't think that was a Chomsky idea. Like, I think he believed that thing. This about so the idea is that all language has certain common structures. Well, we've known this for a long time. Um, and so his idea was, because there's such universal aspects to language, that there must be a universally similar aspect of the human brain. And we know this now not to be true. So um, yeah. So it's a tough thing. But yeah, I mean, there are certain things that Chomsky believed that are still true. But when people talk about the Chomsky school of thought was innate language with a organelle structure, brain structure, designed for language. And the reason was, fundamentally, Chomsky believed this, is that Chomsky believed in intelligent design. Like, Chomsky believes in God, and he believed that, like, the human mind was designed by God. That's one thing. Like, a lot of people are like, blows people's minds about Chomsky. Like, no, Chomsky is a man of faith. Like, he believes in God. Like, he's not an atheist. Like, he believed that the human brain was designed by God, and that God would place a language structure in there. Yeah. So yeah, but this is also, yeah, completely true as well. Like, was Aristotle's a waste. Now I need to go 2 minutes. Oh, it'll be 30 seconds. Hold on. Best part of the stream. Best part of the stream. I mean, if he is now, I mean, I know when he was doing his linguistic stuff, he wasn't. I mean, that surprises me. I mean, he might have changed. Let me see. Oh, he says now that he. What is his quote here? Do you believe in God? Can't answer, I'm afraid. I'm not being flippant, but I don't understand the question. What is it that I'm supposed to believe or not believe in? Are you asking me whether I believe there is something not in the universe or the universes, if there are maybe infinitely many of them, and that somehow stands above them? I've never heard any reason for believing that. Something else? What? There are many concepts of spirituality, among them various notions of divinity developed. So yeah, he kind of gives a super broad a super abstract idea about God. And I've heard this before. I've actually kind of like there was a time where I used to. I mean, I just tell people I'm an atheist now, but I used to tell people that like the if God exists, he exists outside of this universe, and this universe has the duality of existence versus non-existence. And so if God were outside of this universe, he wouldn't be held to the same standard of existence and non-existence. So God could sort of exist like the square root of -1. Like he's just kind of an imaginary thing that like half exists. So I don't know. Let's see. Does Preston have a strangely shaped nose? You're getting the attention here. I think my nose is somewhat crooked, just a little bit, but there's also a shadow here that causes a little bit. But I don't know if it's too. I mean, everybody's nose is a little bit crooked, but I gotta sleep on it. It does look weirder today in this light. It might be where I have my ring light and things like that affect it. But yeah. Oh, it's my troll friend. This is my troll friend trying to gaslight me. Okay. This is this question of Schrodinger's God. Like, if we are truly talking about these questions of like things that, like, if God did have infinite power, would he be beheld, like, would existence and non-existence even be like a thing for him, and why would they be, right? Like it doesn't really make sense. But once you start getting in these high level things, nothing really makes sense. So now on this question, agnostics withhold judgment, atheists believe there is no God. That's certainly true of what an agnostic is, and there's not a atheist and agnostic are not mutually exclusive. How the words are used in America are right now are a bit weird, because usually people go, oh, if you're a Christian you believe in God, and if you're an atheist you don't believe in God, and so an agnostic is just like, I don't know, and I'm in the middle. Well, that's really kind of like silly, because that's not what agnosticism means. And it's also like there's no certainty to anybody, right? Like no Christian is 100% certain that God exists. They'll claim it and stuff like this, but like there's a degree of doubt on the Christian sense, but they'll still call themselves a Christian. Atheists, there's a degree of doubt that there might be a God, and yet people don't like get in Christians' faith, like Christians' faces about it. Like when an atheist says like, oh, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God, people will often like get in their face and be like, well, how do you know there's no God? And you're like, well, you don't do the same thing when you say, oh, there's a Christian. Like, oh, how do you know that there's a God? You're not saying there's a probability that there's no God. Well, no, like any honest Christian would say, sure, I've got doubts every once in a while, right? So like, and then, so in a sense, everybody has an I don't know structure, but it's like, in which way are you leaning, like on probability wise? Also, I think there's a difference between atheist and atheist in the sense like, I don't believe in God versus I believe there is no God. Because that linguistically is a different question as well. Like, I don't believe there's anyone in my kitchen right now. I don't know 100% that there's no one in my kitchen right now. There could be someone in my kitchen. I don't believe there's someone in my kitchen. Like, do I like what, like at what level, like do I have to say that? And like, do I believe there's no one in my kitchen? Or I don't believe or if someone said, actually, I have to rephrase this. Let's say someone said to me, is George Clooney in your kitchen right now? It's like, well, I don't believe George Clooney is in my kitchen. Is anyone in your kitchen? Well, I doubt there's anyone in my kitchen. I'm a little more sure that there's no George Clooney in my kitchen than no one. So like what level do you get? And so when you say like, oh, am I an atheist? Like, do I think there's a Christian sky god? Absolutely not. Like, do I believe that there is a creator of the universe who suspends the laws of nature every once in a while and causes miracles? No. Do I think there might be some sort of like odd, abstract, inexplicable thing, like in a multiversal sense? I don't know. Maybe I can't even conceptualize it all. So like, at what level am I comfortable using the term atheist, and what does that mean? I'm just going to say I'm an atheist. Like, I don't believe that I don't believe that any religion on earth is correct. And hey, let's see if we get Carmine working here again. Hello, you're back.
All right, one more time.
Okay, I'm
By the way, if we go by some theorist, I'm technically in your kitchen because that's a huge theory that you and I are living together.
oh yeah, it's true. It's true. Um, have you heard of the Indian concept of Astika Nastika, similar to the Western theist atheist divide? I have not heard of that, but I'll have to look into that. But some of these concepts, like these, when you get deep into like weird Hindu Buddhist thought, where they start talking about the hand of what's the sound of one hand clapping and stuff like that, and how everything's an illusion. It's you start getting in these odd situations. So, are you going to drop again, or are you back for good?
I have no idea what's going on. I really need to clean my computer. I haven't cleaned it in a while, so gotta clean all the cookies, temp files, all that stuff.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about how you're so Carmine's been very resistant for Witcher, which irks me a little bit because
We have so much to get to, though. Why this one thing specifically? Don't let the
up. You've muted yourself. You're still there, but you're muted. That Carmine. So while we're waiting for Carmine to unfuck himself, Pascal's wager. Pascal's wager this is the idea that you might as well believe in God because it's like because if you're right, he's going to you'll have like eternal, you'll have eternal life and get to go to heaven. And if you're wrong, then like you get nothing. But if you don't believe in God, like you're not really getting anything out of it. You're getting unhappiness, and you're sad your whole life, fearing death, and so you might as well like believe in God. I don't know if the human mind works that way, where you can just like force yourself into believing something. But I think Richard Dawkins would come up with the other thing about like, well, what if you're wrong? What if you die and like there's a jealous God who really hates the Christian sky God? Like it turns out the real God is Baal, and he hates Christian sky God, and any believers in Christian sky God are going to be tortured extra. Like, so there's always these other like philosophical things, but you just can't force yourself into believing something like that. Plus, like, why would a God like set up a system where I have to believe in him in order to like reap the benefits of afterlife? Like, why is he weeding me out? Like, he provides me with not enough evidence for his existence on Earth, and then I've got a critical mind, and I'm like, okay, all the evidence you've given me empirically says you're probably not existing. And then you provide this book with all of these logical inconsistencies, and then you have all your followers act like absolute dicks. Okay, all of this stuff. And then I die and I go and I'm like, oh, you didn't believe in me. And I'm like, fuck you, dude. Like, what were you doing? You gave me no reason to believe in you. And then you had all your followers be dicks. And then you made your book, completely unreadable, like logical inconsistencies. Like, why would you do that? Now I've got to get tortured for eternity? Dude, Dick move, dude. Dick move. Like, why would he do that? Just a weird. It's a weird system that like it's a weird concept that heaven is only for the believers. Like, is I mean, it benefits religious leaders too much, like to have that, because obviously religious leaders get to have believers who give them money or follow them in war or whatever. Um, and so it benefits them too much to say like, well, you've got to believe, you've got to be a follower, or else, like why threaten everybody, and why give such a bad system? I don't know. It's pretty illogical of the of divine creator. Like I'd just be like, oh man, and what is he weeding out? Like he's got all these like critical people like who are in hell sitting there going, oh man, yeah, I was looking for the evidence too. I know. I should have just bought it. Oh man. Heaven would be like filled with these people. And then you'd be around these people that just believe stuff blindly in heaven. So it's pretty tough. Um let's see what we got here. Oh my god. If AOC and Shapiro had a child, it would be Azora High. I think the only person that's imagining that is Ben Shapiro. Like Ben Shapiro is obsessed with AOC. Like, oh my God, would he like to have a child with her? I mean, can he not stop talking about her? I mean, oh man. Um, but I don't know what would happen. I mean, she's not Jewish, so I don't know. It would go against all of his beliefs, right? Um, uh, 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 Um, hearing Preston talk about Schrodinger's Sky God as an A plus content I come here for. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's just the example of like um, how abstract you have to start thinking about like the world, and like when we die and stuff like that. Like, what more could there be of? Um, it's just like once you like why are we saying that time and existence and space and all of these things are even elements of another universe, like even when you talk about like physicists and dimensions, and they talk about, oh well, there's going to be like 13 dimensions or whatever, string theory, like even having dimensions, even having concepts, even having words to describe these things are all are all beyond everything. So, I mean, I guess it's a little comforting to think that the universe is beyond my comprehension, and therefore, and it's probably beyond the comprehension of everyone else on Earth. Because you have to think about like, okay, so I don't understand quantum physics. I don't understand quantum physics at all, really. I've listened to stuff on it. I don't really it's really, these are super geniuses at MIT and everything trying to figure this stuff out. And let's say those guys are 3 times smarter than me. Let's say that's the order, like 300% smarter than me. Like, I don't know if human beings can actually be 300% smarter than the average person, but say I'm average and they're 300% smarter than the average. Okay. That's what you can comprehend with 300% being 300% smarter than the average human being. But shouldn't like understanding of the universe like require orders of magnitude like in the millions, billions, trillions in order to actually properly understand the universe? So we would not be anywhere close to understanding anything. So that gives me that makes me feel better that it's all so complicated that that's that you know um can I ask you this? When it comes to Ironborn, do you still believe the Hightowers are suspicious of the Ironborn? At least you're on. Um, I definitely think that the Hightowers specifically were keeping their eyes on the Ironborn, and you know, I think there's something to like the Black Tide, like indoctrinating Black Tide and trying to spread the faith of the Seven and things like that, and controlling things. I don't necessarily believe that George R. R. Martin has written it. Like, he kind of has reserved certain topics for the future. Like the High Towers is one of them. What happened at Starfall is another. Like there's going to be something super important here, and I've reserved these characters for that super important plot line, but we aren't sure what that is. So, and it always reminds me of the South Park Game of Thrones episode where he's like, "Oh my God, your pizza is going to be great. It's going to be great." And they're like, "Wait, you haven't even ordered it yet?" Like, So I think that's a big aspect of it, is that I think there is something definitely up with the High Towers and the Ironborn and the connection, but I'm not sure um, if it's if George has actually even come up with the idea himself. Like there's not much we can get. Like as important as the High Towers are, there's so little written about them and about their history and their motivations and their alliances. Like other places are really easy to figure out. Like looking at the Ironborn are remarkably consistent in who they align with and the houses and everything. Like when I did my Alliances of Iron series, I was like, huh, this all fits. Like all the people cheering for Asha were the same people doing this, were the same people doing this. This all aligns. This all makes sense. Nothing really makes sense with the High Towers, like who they married. They've just married everybody. Um, like what they're up to. It could be that they're constantly being neutral and just waiting. They're pulling a Walder Frey. So that they don't have a master plan, or maybe they have many master plans and they're trying to think about it. But I definitely think there's something up, but I don't know if George knows what it is. Is the Oil of Black Stone going to have any plot significance? I don't think anything super significant, other than the fact that the Black Stone like kind of shows that there was a advanced society prior to um, uh, prior to um, the plot, that you know whether it be people that are building the wall or Storm's End or whatever, just that there was a super advanced society that predates everything, and that we're in a regressed society. But da, da, da. Good morning, Europe. um, it's all of Westeros from Dorne to the Frostfangs on a single tectonic plate. It's gotta be like so. There was another. So back when I did my geology and Game of Thrones series, there was an actual geologist that PhD geologist that had another website where he studied the geology of of the uh, of the map and the things that are really ridiculous about the map, because he's a proper geologist and George R. R. Martin is not, but he was still like, and he understood that like George R. R. Martin is not, and this is all magic and everything, but he's still going to like look at things through a scientific lens. And so there is a real problem with Westeros in that there's remarkably little volcanic activity. Um, Other than Dragonstone, there's no volcanoes, which is really unlikely. Like you could look at any place on Earth and you're going to have more volcanoes than Westeros. So he said that's really weird, and he's like, especially when you consider that there's remnants of volcanic activity like basalt and obsidian and things like this. Like so, where is all this, like why wouldn't there be volcanic activity? There was one big question about whether or not, this really fascinating question about whether or not the God's Eye was a specific type of collapsed volcano. It starts with a C. Um, I'm gonna look this up because it's caldera. A caldera. So I got to show you this picture of a caldera because it's awesome. So a caldera is like the volcano builds up and then I think it loses support underneath or and then the whole thing kind of collapses down. And sometimes there's like an island in the middle, like here. And so when people saw the God's Eye, like a lot of geology people are like, "Oh, is that could that be a caldera?" And he's like, "Possibly, but it would have to be an enormous, absolutely enormous caldera for a lake the size of the God's Eye, um, in order to produce it." But at the same time, like if you had a volcano that huge, where's the rest of the volcanic activity in Westeros? And there's just none, which is really odd because you've got a lot of other stuff that points to geologic activity. Like there's a lot of sandstone, a lot of basalt, obsidian, stuff like that, a lot of underground caves and things like that. And even that would show like geological activity, even hot springs and things like that. But like for some reason, like there's no volcanoes. So what it really comes down to is John just doesn't know. John just doesn't know. Not John. George R. R. Martin just doesn't really know geology very very well. Um, so he popped a few things here and there, but it's odd that like there's all this basalt in the neck. Like where did that come from? If there's no volcanoes anywhere, like where? So, um, let's see. What we got some last things here as we wind down this. Yeah, I mean, this is the question: is like if it's really old, could it have settled down? But then you still have Dragonstone, which is still active. I think there's other things related to whether or not like the size of mountains. Like the mountains are really tall north of the wall, and so that would mean that there would be active shifting tectonic plates. And yet, if you have active shifting tectonic plates, you should have volcanoes in a different location, um, because you have a moving plate or something like that. Um, yeah, this is the meteor impact. Of course, like Lightbringer is like bigger on meteor impact stuff, but um, could the God's Eye be a meteor impact? I don't know. I guess I don't know that much about geology either, but like something that would create a meteor impact that large would I think likely kill everything on the planet. I think there was a statement about something like that, like that the lake is too large for meteor impact, um, uh, because of how large it would be. You're talking like extinction size meteor or something like that. Um, so he, he has a stream. He has a long stream on, and he has a website on as well. I will have to look up the guy's name. Um, Geology of Game of Thrones. Miles Trayer is his name, and so he has some interesting stuff. If you'd like to, I'll put this up for a second. This is it, Miles Trayer. So he hasn't done anything in a while, but he's mapped all this, and he says it doesn't really make sense, to have these high mountains and no real volcanic activity anywhere else. So uh, mm, mm, mm. But do we actually know where the dinosaur killer lake is? um, people say what, that it's, is it the Chica Chulub crater? Um, so some people think that the edge of the Yucatan Peninsula was perhaps where the dinosaur thing happened. Um, I have no idea, but this is a theory. But even that's a pretty big extinction level event that changes the Earth for quite a bit. Um, but but I'm not sure. If it's big enough to cause that mass extinction. Um, and then, I mean, how you're talking like hundreds of thousands of years, right, before of geologic change that comes after that. Like uh, the God's Eye, it seems like it'd be too much of an impact on the weather of the Earth. So I don't know. Mm-mm-mm. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. I don't know if it'll ever be brought up, obviously. Um, but yeah. First Vale King was Hugor of the Hills. How does it relate to Tyrion's fake name, Hugor Hill? Uh, I don't know. I don't know if it does. The was it just a was he just kind of having a chance to? I mean, the Tyrion story in A Dance with Dragons is very much a killing time kind of story. So him talking about the Andals and their history and stuff like that. Um, was George just kind of filling in space with some background um, to slowly get Tyrion across to Daenerys, right? Um, this is his big, people, like I said, people make a big deal about the 5 year gap, but because he got rid of the 5 year gap, he couldn't just have Tyrion show up somewhere else. He needed to do a long journey of him traveling to Daenerys, so he had to give like background information on every area that he was going through, Croyane and Andalos, and then down to Volantis, and find random things for him to get involved in to kill time. Um, and so I don't know if there's anything too relevant to the name Hugor. I can't think of Tyrion being a king or anything like that being so important. Um, the though one thing that I think that was a little interesting about that is they all did live in hills, right? Which was reminiscent of the Cave of the Three-Eyed Crow and um, the Knights of the Hollow Hill with Brotherhood Without Banners and things like that. That there is so much of an underground society, subterranean society. I mean, it was another chance for him to do that. So I mean, he had a chance to write about the Andals and the Iron, the birth of the Iron Age, and bring some more subterranean caves that he could have in the story and stuff like that. So, but I don't know if it means anything about Tyrion being like a king later on. Um, Paleontologist here. We know that the crater from the meteor that killed the dinosaur. Only controversy was volcanic activity might have already been killing dinosaurs off. Yeah, there's also I also thought it was very interesting about with regards to science and history of Earth, um, is the rise of viruses. Um, let's see. With which regard? Neither dead. Like I've trying to remember how long ago, you know, there is some discussion of whether or not viral pandemic caused contributed to the death of the dinosaurs and things like that. But I'm not sure when the first viruses appeared on Earth in their modern form. When I mean like virus, I mean like infecting people, kind of stuff. Um, but the but that's a there's just so much we don't know. I don't know. And then George when he writes these stories is writing with his knowledge in the of a science fiction author in the mid '90s. So it's tough to say. And sometimes never kill man are the Janshi former humans like the others. Um, so at least my interpretation of the story. So for those that haven't read it, I talk about and sometimes never kill man a lot, but and sometimes never kill man is basically a story about the where he's lifted kind of the idea of who these people are and plopped it onto the children of the forest. So the story of the children of the forest is roughly a retelling of and seven times never kill man, which is a retelling of a basic colonial story. He's making a criticism of colonialism with this story. But you got to go back even further and say, okay, and seven times never kill man is a line from the guy who wrote the Jungle Book, and it's part of the Wolf pack cry. There's a poem in it about like the laws of the wolf. One of the lines is in Seven Times Never Kill Man, because the idea is that men will come after you and kill you. So it's not a good idea to kill man if you're a wolf. And so the guy that wrote Jungle, Rudyard Kipling was his name. I forgot that for a second. Rudyard Kipling, he's a weird guy because he wrote Jungle Book with a slight romanticism of the colonial period, and with some sympathies towards colonialism. That like, no, many of these colonialists really did want to help people and like help develop societies and things like this. And it's one of the criticisms people have of Rudyard Kipling. And so George R. R. Martin, is a big left-wing hippie and is certainly against colonialism in any form. And so the story of And Sometimes Never Kill Man is, this religious group called the Steel Angels, who are pretty much the same as followers of R'hllor, are landing on this planet and trying to take it over. But the local population are these Wookiee-like furry creatures who live pretty peacefully, and who have a stable population, and they worship these pyramids. And so as the Steel Angels start expanding on the planet, they start killing off these Wookiee creatures, and so our protagonist starts selling weapons. He wants to like arm the Janshi, and he's not really very successful in doing it. But in the end, the Steel Angels are all tricked into believing. All of a sudden, like the pyramids change, and they start the Steel Angels see it as a miracle because they see their god in the middle of a pyramid, and they start like getting visions. And the visions tell them to essentially kill themselves, so, or at least reduce their numbers greatly. Like they get rid of all of their food and they hang their children as sacrifices. It's quite a brutal ending. And so some people have the interpretation that at the end of the story, the Steel Angels were becoming Janshi. Like physically, like their eyes were changing, and that the Janshi were humans once. I don't necessarily think that the Janshi were humans, but I think they were a previous imperialistic alien race, just like the Steel Angels were, and that they landed and they started settling, and that the pyramids infected their minds and made them change. Because the few Janshi that he does like convince to take weapons and bring them off world, they start acting completely differently. They start having way too many kids. They start acting violently. They start acting just like humans. So the idea is that when you took the Janshi out of the environment of the pyramids, they started acting like humans. But I don't think they were literally humans. I just think they were another alien race who was imperialistic and ever expanding and warlike and everything. So I think it was more like the pyramid was forcing everyone into a balance situation. And the only way to do that was to trick people into not having as many kids and to kill themselves. The question that I don't know at the end of that story is whether the Steel Angels will completely die or if they will end up in a balanced state like the Janshi. I don't know. Mm-mm-mm. Um, da, da, da. Plenty of room to speak about earlier civilizations without contradicting the evidence. Are we talking about on Earth or in Westeros? I think the big thing about Earth earlier civilizations is the lack of carbon in the atmosphere in a sudden burst like there is with us. So the idea is that if there was another um, society then that was at least industrialized, they would have put carbon in the atmosphere, and we would notice it, like put carbon really quickly into the atmosphere like we have, and we don't necessarily see that, but uh, mm, mm, mm. Um, um, let's see here. I sometimes post this, but it's tough because I don't want to get in trouble with copyright laws. But the but I have every George R. R. Martin collection, but in a document. Um, every once in a while, I periodically like will have something up really quick and then it goes away because I don't want to get in any trouble. But yeah, but specifically for how and Seven Times Never Killed Man, you can find that on in Dream Songs, um, which has Dream Songs has most of his good stuff. I mean, honestly, like his other stuff is it's around, but it's not as good. Like if you read Dream Songs, you get his best stories. Uh, there's a few outside that I like, but for the most part, you know, it's they're kind of the same. Men of Greywater Station is one that's perhaps good that's not in the collection that I think is worth a read, but it's um yeah. Um let's see. Yeah, so my first video outlining the Thousand Years universe and introducing it disappeared. Um what's really weird is that one got, and it's perhaps because I put too many of the stories in the description, but that one got flagged for copyright, probably because I posted too many stories and links to the stories in the description. And so uh, I haven't tried recently. I tried to re-upload it, but it was like you cannot re-upload this because of the copyright strike. And I was like, oh, okay. So I mean, it's I should maybe, I don't know, make a small change to it and try to put it up again. But it's around here somewhere. I have to, but it's so it's kind of a bad. It's bad. Like now, it's like a bad quality video. But maybe I'll put it up. I'll put it up this week and see. But it's I'll put it up this week. I'll make some changes and try to put and pop it up and see what happens. Um, Least favorite Thousand Worlds story. I think some of them are just kind of weird wastes of time. I think nobody leaves New Pittsburgh. Like, there's nothing really insightful or interesting about it. I mean, he's just used it to introduce this idea of corpse handling, and then it's just okay. Your town sucks. There's some that are very short that don't really have much idea to them. Like, he wrote a story called. It's not a long story, but he wrote this one story called FTE, in which the scientists are trying to come up with subspace so that they can go faster than light. And this one guy finds out that he's been researching this for years, and then he finds out that actually, like, they've discovered subspace years ago, but it was slower than light, and that's the end of the story. And you're just like it's not really not novel of a concept, like that you had to write a story about subspace being. And he thought it was super clever that, like, oh, everybody thinks that subspace is going to be faster than light. What if subspace is slower than light? Oh, okay. Well, then that's the end of the story. I think that's technically not a Thousand Worlds story. But if I think of my Thousand Worlds, yeah, I think the corpse handler stuff. I think if even that counts as Thousand Worlds, I'm not sure. Um, there's stuff. Trying to think, going through the list in my head, which ones are not that great. A lot of the Thousand Worlds is really strong. Now that I think about it, now that I go through the list and, like, what the stories we went through, I definitely think that the corpse handlers, if those even count, it's arguable whether they count. But I think the first two corpse handlers are kind of worthless, but the third, Meat House Man, the third one, is incredible. And just going through, like, do I think all of Tough Voyaging is that great? I think half of Tough. I don't. I think Tough Voyaging is okay. You're right that, like, there's nothing really to worship. Worship is just the fact that there's a second author on that, and it's just kind of like a worthless little story. Most of them though, I do really like. I mean, I think Glass Flower is great. I think Stone City is great. I think Night Flyers is great. And Sometimes Never Kill Man is great. I think Men of Greywater Station is good. I think The Hero is whatever. I think This Tower of Ashes is great. Like, there's some ones. The Runners is kind of forgettable. The Runners is, I don't know. Glass Flower is great. Read by Claudia Black of Farscape fame. She's an incredible, like, reader. She should do more of that. Yeah, Night of the Vampires is kind of worthless. I don't know if it's Thousand Worlds specific. It's not Thousand Worlds specifically, but there's nothing really special about that. Bitter Blooms is okay. I don't know if there's. I'm trying to think of anything really, anything super special. That's worth it. But yeah, I love Meat House Man, even though I don't think George R. R. Martin likes it at all. But man, what a great story. Um, yeah, Guardians is, I think that's the first. Guardians is the kind of the first one with this is the first story that mentions green dreams. But yeah, it's this, nature, um, this nature alien that's, like, trying to that controls all of the things on the planet in a balance. And then when they started fighting and killing the creatures, they didn't understand that they were destroying the entire balance. Trying to think if Night Flyers is great, because I did just say that. Yeah, I guess Nightfall. Well, I guess looking back, like the concept, I still do think that the Vulcan concept is really quite interesting. I think that the Ten Little Indian like horror aspect of it, which is 75% of the story, is not that great. But for some reason, I do really like the Vulcan and like the search for the Vulcan, and then finding the Vulcan in the end. I do think that that is an interesting aspect of the story. I think it makes it salvageable. The rest of it is just like them fighting the mother, um, who's in the computer is kind of worthless. But there's a lot of high concepts in it, so I guess I give it a pass. This Tower of Ashes, I guess it's the ambiguity at the end of the dream and not understanding what he's doing with like the cat having spider legs at the end and stuff like that really kind of stuck with me. Um, that and you are true that like the newer version of Night Flyers does a better job at fleshing out the other characters. So there's two versions of Night Flyers. Night Flyers where he doesn't even name the characters that are getting killed off one by one, and then a second version where he like it's um so it's like it's almost twice as long, where he gives them names and personalities, and so when they're killed off, like it feels a bit more, a little more impact to it. So I mean, I do think that the second story is better because you actually get to know these characters, but at the same time, you're expanding the part of the story that I didn't really even care about. I really wanted to know more about the Vulcan and their study of the Vulcan and like what that meant, but it being in this horror story, yeah, it's all over the place. Night Flyers are okay. You guys have changed my mind that Night Flyers is a big fucking mess. But at the same time, it's like he's so ambitious. It's so ambitious. And Glass Flower is one of his best. I think Glass Flower is in my definitely in my definitely top five stories of maybe in the top three. Like Glass Flower is incredible. Um, just the thought of like it's really when it comes down to his magnum opus of thinking about blended consciousness and who we are as human beings. Are we memory? Are we soul? Are we more? There's no story that really gets to the heart of it, and really explores those issues as much as the Glass Flower. It's really a beautiful tale. Um, I mean, horrible tale too, but it's a beautiful tale exploring like human existence and human consciousness and what it means to be a person. I think it's great. Yeah, yeah. Night Flyers is cool. Take it back. It is. It's just all over the place. There's some great aspects to it. But come on. Um, uh, yeah, Pear Shaped Man, Meat House Man, Pear Shaped Man is it's another good exploration of his blended consciousness. It's creepier the more the horror. Um, the funny thing, yeah, this is the funny aspect of Glass Flower because like he took it. It's the last story he wrote, and it took the last story to really give all of the background of the Thousand Worlds universe that he'd been writing in for 25 years. He'd been doing this. He's been doing this universe, and he'd established so much in the very last story. Um, and so uh, it's in many ways it should be the first Thousand Worlds story that one should read if one really wants the background. Um, this is pretty funny. George got dumped and he wrote about it for 40 years. I can understand, having a bad breakup and being hurt about it for 1 year, 2 years, maybe even five, but you're right that like at some point, like 40 years later. um, let's see. Are there suspected or confirmed suicide cases in A Song of Ice and Fire? Let me think about that. Has anyone committed suicide? Like not in a blaze of glory kind of thing? Because I suppose like one could argue that Corin Halfhand's whole mission was a suicide mission, and that they were like giving up their lives in order to let John come back. But that's kind of like in a for a higher purpose kind of stuff versus like I'm just depressed, right? Like Tommen jumping off the tower in Game of Thrones is him being depressed, right? But do we have any cases where someone has just killed themselves? That's a uh this is the big one, right? Yeah. And one's related to that. I suppose like the woman in the Bale the Bard story as well, I suppose, leaping from the tower. Um so yeah, and this is also true. The sky sails are made for suicide. That apparently some people off screen did that. Maybe even Marillion, though we don't know what happened to Marillion. That's that's another plot. Like that's why I want more on the Veil. Like if this is unpopular opinion, if the Winds of Winter came out and it was just like half the characters, but it was Sansa, Sam, like Brienne, like if it was just those plot lines, I'd be okay. And he's just like it's the same storylines from Feast for Crows, but he's continuing just the Feast for Crows storylines. I'd be pretty happy with that. I'd be like, I don't need to know what's happening with Tyrion and Jon and Dany because the answer is not much. This is the question. Yeah, did he? But Lord Tyrell. But was that suicide? We don't know, or was he just being stupid? Um, Macer Crescent did kill himself. Good point, Carmine. He knew, but it was like for the higher good of trying to kill um, Melisandre, though it was a suicide. But it's funny, like there's no like there are people driven to suicide by anguish, and there's like people forced into suicide for some like um, reason in the story. But no one has anyone just been like just depressed, medically depressed suicide. I don't know if we had that, you know. But that White Walker committed suicide when he messed with the Slayer. It's true. It's true. 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 Uh, all right, guys. We've been going at it for 3 hours here, so I'm losing my voice again. So yeah, you're right. Ares Oakheart kind of killed himself. Can argue that one. It's true. That was also um, yeah, yeah. Danny walking into the pyre. All these kind of all these true. But no, they didn't find the body for Ashara. They didn't find the body. All right, guys. Thanks for joining me today. We will talk soon, probably next week. And but I'm losing my voice and gotta have a rest. So I'll see you guys later. Thanks, everyone.